Interstate 95, 11:47 p.m. Blood. There was so much blood. It pooled beneath her bare feet, mixing with rainwater and motor oil, creating dark rivers that snaked across the highway shoulder. Mallory Grant pressed her back against the dead Honda Civic and screamed. A raw, animal sound that tore from her throat as her body betrayed her in the most brutal way possible. The baby was coming. Not tomorrow. Not at the hospital with doctors and monitors and her mother holding her hand. Now, here, on the side of a highway where trucks roared past at 70 miles per hour, their drivers too focused. On their destinations to notice the pregnant woman crumpling to her knees in the darkness. Another contraction hit. This one was different. This one felt like dying. No, she howled into the rain. Her fingernails scraped against wet gravel as she tried to anchor herself to something, anything, that might stop what was happening. It's too early. Please, God, it's too early. But God wasn't answering. No one was. Mallory had called 911 7 minutes ago. 7 minutes of listening to a robotic voice tell her that all operators were currently busy. 7 minutes of bleeding. 7 minutes of watching every single car, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, fly past without slowing. She was invisible. 37 weeks pregnant, alone in a thunderstorm, hemorrhaging on the side of I-95. And she was completely, utterly invisible. Her phone had died 4 minutes ago. The last thing she'd seen on the screen was a text from her sister. You should have stayed with Marcus. At least he provided for you. Marcus. The name hit her like a physical blow. Marcus, who had thrown her out when she was 5 months pregnant. Marcus, who had called her a worthless leech. Marcus, who had told her the baby probably wasn't even his, even though she had never, not once, been with anyone else. Marcus, who was probably warm and dry right now, sleeping in the king-sized bed she used to share with him, while the mother of his child bled out on cold asphalt. Another contraction. Closer now. Too close. Mallory felt pressure building between her hips, terrible, impossible pressure, and she knew with sickening certainty that her daughter was coming whether she was ready or not. Help me. She screamed at the passing cars. Headlights illuminated her for split seconds before disappearing into the storm. Somebody please help me. A Mercedes flew past, then a pickup truck, then a minivan with stick-figure family decals on the back window. A mother, a father, 3 smiling children. They didn't stop. None of them stopped. Mallory slid down the side of her car until she was sitting in a puddle of blood and rainwater. Her hospital gown, she had been driving herself to the ER when the car broke down, clung to her body like a second skin. She could feel the fabric riding up, exposing her. She didn't care anymore. Dignity was for people who weren't about to die. She tilted her head back and let the rain punish her face. Cold, so cold, but the pain was hot, burning through her pelvis like liquid fire. I'm going to deliver this baby alone. The thought arrived with terrifying clarity. I'm going to deliver this baby alone on the side of a highway, and we're both going to die, and Marcus will go to my funeral with his new girlfriend and tell everyone what a tragedy it was. She laughed. It came out broken, hysterical, wrong. Then she felt something shift inside her, something low and urgent, and the laugh turned into a scream. Half a mile back, a black Range Rover with tinted windows cut through the storm like a predator. Inside, Alexander Devereaux scrolled through quarterly reports on his tablet, a crystal tumbler of bourbon warming in his other hand. He had just closed a deal worth $2.3 billion. He should have been celebrating. Instead, he felt nothing. He always felt nothing. His driver, an older man named Harold who had been with the Devereaux family for 22 years, squinted through the windshield. Nasty night, sir. Alexander didn't look up. Numbers were cleaner than conversation. Numbers didn't expect him to perform humanity he didn't feel. Sir, I think there's someone on the shoulder up ahead. Then go around them. Sir, it looks like... I said, go around them, Harold. The Range Rover accelerated. Headlights swept across the shoulder, briefly illuminating a broken-down Honda Civic, and Alexander looked up. He saw her, drenched, bleeding, pregnant, screaming into the storm with her mouth open so wide it looked like her face might split in half. Keep driving, the cold, practical part of his brain instructed. You have a board meeting at 7 a.m. You cannot afford complications. He had closed billion-dollar deals without blinking. He had fired 3,000 employees in a single afternoon without losing a minute of sleep. He had looked his own father in the eye and told him to go to hell with a smile on his face. But one look at her face, at the terror and agony and absolute hopelessness written across her features, made his blood run cold. "Stop the car." Have you ever needed help, truly, desperately needed help, and realized no one was coming? That moment when your phone dies and you're stranded, when your voice goes hoarse from screaming and the world just keeps moving. When you look into the eyes of strangers and see nothing but empty hurry. Mallory knew that moment intimately now. She had spent 23 minutes on that highway shoulder. 23 minutes of watching humanity fail her in real time. Businessmen in BMWs who couldn't be bothered. Mothers in SUVs who clutched their steering wheels tighter and looked away. Teenagers in hand-me-down sedans who probably saw her but convinced themselves it wasn't their problem. 23 minutes of learning that when you're at your lowest, when you are bleeding and broken and begging for mercy, the world doesn't stop. It never stops. And now here she was, squatting in a puddle of her own blood, feeling her daughter's head pressing against her cervix, knowing with absolute certainty that she was about to give birth in the mud like an animal. The cruelest part, she had done everything right. She had left her abuser. She had packed her bags in the middle of the night, hands shaking, heart pounding, Marcus's threats still ringing in her ears. She had driven 400 miles to start over. She had found a job, a tiny apartment, a clinic that offered sliding scale prenatal care. She had fought for this baby with everything she had. And this was her reward, dying in the rain while the world looked the other way. The Range Rover's tires screamed against wet asphalt as Harold slammed the brakes. Alexander was out of the car before it fully stopped, his $4,000 Italian loafers splashing through ankle-deep water. Rain plastered his hair to his forehead within seconds. His cashmere coat became a sopping weight on his shoulders. He didn't notice any of it. All he saw was her. She was younger than he'd initially thought, mid-20s maybe. Dark hair clung to her face in wet ropes. Her hospital gown had ridden up past her hips, exposing legs that were streaked with blood and trembling violently. Her eyes were wild, unfocused, rolling with pain. She looked like a wounded deer about to be hit by a second car. "Ma'am," Alexander's voice came out wrong. Too formal, too stiff. He cleared his throat. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her head snapped toward him. For a moment, she didn't seem to register that he was real. Then recognition flickered, not of him specifically, but of the concept. Another human. Someone had actually stopped. "My baby," she gasped. "My baby is coming and I can't. Another contraction hit her. Alexander watched her face transform, watched agony rewrite every feature, and something cracked open in his chest, something he had spent 38 years keeping sealed shut. "Harold," he shouted over his shoulder. "Call 911. "Now." "Already on it, sir. They're saying 20 minutes minimum. There's a pile-up on—" "20 minutes?" Alexander's voice dropped to something dangerous. "Tell them she's hemorrhaging on the side of I-95, and if someone isn't here in 10, I will personally buy whatever hospital they work for and fire every single one of them." He turned back to the woman. She was crying now, silent tears mixing with rain, her body shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "What's your name?" Alexander asked. "E. Mallory." "Mallory. That's beautiful." He didn't know why he said it. Pleasantries felt obscene in this context, but her shoulders relaxed a fraction of an inch, so maybe it wasn't entirely useless. "Mallory, I need you to listen to me. Help is coming. I'm not going to leave you. Do you understand?" She laughed, that same broken, hysterical sound from before. "That's what they all say." "Who?" "Everyone." Her voice cracked. "Everyone says they won't leave. My mother said she'd always be there. She chose my stepfather. My boyfriend said we'd raise this baby together. He threw me out when I was 5 months pregnant. The 911 operator said help was on the way. That was 15 minutes ago." She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength, her fingernails digging into his skin. "Everyone leaves. Everyone always leaves. So don't you dare stand there and make me promises you won't keep." Alexander stared at her. In 38 years, he had never been spoken to like this. He was Alexander Devereaux. People cowered when he entered rooms. They scrambled to agree with him. They told him what he wanted to hear and thanked him for the privilege. This woman, this bleeding, broken, abandoned woman, was looking at him like he was just another disappointment waiting to happen. And for the first time in his adult life, Alexander felt something he couldn't name. He knelt in the mud beside her. Cold water soaked through his 800 pants. He didn't care. "I'm not everyone," he said quietly. "And I don't make promises I can't keep." Mallory's grip on his wrist loosened slightly. Another contraction hit. She screamed, doubling over, and Alexander caught her before she collapsed completely. Her blood was warm against his hands. The next contraction nearly broke her. Mallory felt it building from somewhere deep and primal, a tidal wave of pressure that started in her spine and crashed forward through her pelvis. She opened her mouth to scream, but nothing came out. Her body had moved beyond screaming, beyond crying, beyond anything except raw animal survival. "Breathe." The stranger's voice cut through the pain. "Mallory, you need to breathe." She wanted to laugh. Breathe? She couldn't remember how to breathe. She couldn't remember anything except the fire between her legs and the certainty that she was being split in half. "I can't," she gasped. "I can't do this. I can't." "You can." His hands were on her shoulders now, steadying her. When had he moved behind her? "You've already survived things that should have destroyed you. This is just one more." She didn't know why those words hit so hard. Maybe because he was right. Mallory had survived her father walking out when she was 6, had survived her mother's string of abusive boyfriends, one of whom had left, cigarette scars on her forearms that she still covered with long sleeves, had survived Marcus, 2 years of manipulation, isolation, and escalating violence that had culminated in him pressing a pillow over her face when she told him she was pregnant. She had survived all of it, but this felt different. This felt final. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Something's wrong. There's too much blood. I know." 2 words. Simple. Honest. He wasn't pretending everything was fine. He wasn't feeding her empty reassurances. He saw the blood pooling beneath her, and he stayed anyway. Something in Mallory's chest cracked open. "I'm scared," she admitted. The words felt foreign in her mouth. She had spent so many years being strong, being the one who held things together, that admitting fear felt like a confession. "I'm so scared." "I know," Alexander said again. "But fear doesn't mean you're weak. It means you understand what's at stake." Another contraction. This one brought a gush of warm fluid between her legs. Oh God. Mallory looked down. Blood. So much blood. Too much blood. Oh God, oh God, oh God. "Harold." Alexander's voice cracked like a whip. "Where's that ambulance?" 12 minutes out, sir. The roads are..." She doesn't have 12 minutes. The shout echoed across the empty highway. For a moment, everything fell silent except the rain and Mallory's ragged breathing. Then she felt it. Pressure. Terrible, impossible, undeniable pressure. "The baby's coming," she heard herself say. Her voice sounded distant, underwater. Right now. The baby's coming right now. Alexander had never felt fear like this. He had stood in boardrooms facing hostile takeovers worth billions, had testified before congressional committees while cameras broadcast his every word to millions, had received death threats from competitors who didn't appreciate his aggressive expansion strategies. None of it compared to this. He was kneeling in a puddle of blood on the side of a highway, watching a woman he'd known for less than 10 minutes prepare to give birth, and he had absolutely no idea what to do. "Harold," he called, his voice steadier than he felt. "Get the emergency kit from the trunk, and the blankets, all of them." "Sir, shouldn't we wait for the..." "Now, Harold." The older man scrambled to comply. Alexander turned back to Mallory. Her face had gone gray beneath the pallor of shock. Her lips were turning blue. He didn't need medical training to know she was losing too much blood too fast. "Mallory, look at me." Her eyes drifted, unfocused. "Mallory." He cupped her face in his hands. "Cold, so cold. Stay with me. You need to stay with me." "Tired," she mumbled. "Just tired." "I know, but you can't sleep yet. Your daughter needs you to stay awake." Something flickered in her eyes at the word, daughter. "How did you know?" she whispered. "That it's a girl?" Alexander had no idea. The word had slipped out instinctively. "Lucky guess," he said. "What's her name?" Mallory's cracked lips curved into the ghost of a smile. "Lily, after my grandmother. She was..." She was the only one who ever really loved me. Alexander felt something sharp twist in his chest. Lily needs you to stay awake, he repeated. Can you do that for Lily? Mallory's hand found his. Her grip was weak, trembling but present. I'll try. Harold appeared with an armful of supplies. Alexander grabbed the emergency blanket first, wrapping it around Mallory's shoulders. The silver material crinkled, reflecting the Range Rover's headlights in strange patterns. There's a first aid kit, Harold said, his voice shaking. But sir, I don't think... I know. Alexander was already opening the kit, scanning its contents. Bandages, antiseptic, useless. All of it useless for what was about to happen. Call 911 again. Tell them we're delivering roadside and we need them to talk us through it. Sir, do it. Another contraction seized Mallory. She arched against him, a sound escaping her throat that wasn't quite human. Alexander caught her, held her, felt her body fighting a battle he couldn't help her win. All he could do was not let go. What Alexander Devereaux didn't know yet, what he couldn't possibly have known as he knelt in blood and rainwater, holding a stranger, his hand while she prepared to bring a life into this brutal world, was that stopping his car would cost him everything. His empire, his reputation, his carefully constructed walls, his engagement to a senator's daughter, his relationship with his father. Every single thing he had spent 38 years building would crumble because of the choice he made on this highway tonight, and he would do it all over again without hesitation. But that truth was still hours away, days away, weeks away. Right now, all Alexander knew was that a woman named Mallory was bleeding in his arms. A baby named Lily was fighting to be born, and the ambulance was still 11 minutes out. 11 minutes. An eternity. The 911 dispatcher's voice crackled through Harold's phone, tinny and distant against the roar of rain. Sir, I need you to tell me what you see. Is the baby crowning? Alexander looked at Mallory. She was beyond modesty now, beyond embarrassment, beyond anything except the primal imperative to push. Her hospital gown had ridden up completely. Blood streaked her thighs, and between her legs, "Guess," he heard himself say. "I can see the head." Mallory sobbed. Is she okay? Is my baby okay? You're doing great, the dispatcher said. Both of you. Now I need you to support the baby's head as it emerges. Don't pull, just support. Don't pull. Just support. Alexander had never followed instructions in his life. He gave instructions. He demanded compliance. He fired people who couldn't keep up with his expectations. But now he was on his knees in the mud, hands shaking, following orders from a voice on a phone because a woman and her daughter needed him to be something other than a billionaire. They needed him to be human. Mallory, on the next contraction, I need you to push, the dispatcher instructed. Push like your life depends on it. I can't. Mallory's head lolled against Alexander's shoulder. She was fading, losing too much blood, losing consciousness, losing hope. I can't anymore. I'm so tired. Hey, Alexander's voice came out sharper than intended. You don't get to quit. Not now. Not when you've come this far. You don't understand. I understand that you left an abuser when you were 5 months pregnant. I understand that you drove 400 miles to start over. I understand that you've spent the last half hour bleeding on the side of a highway because the whole world decided you weren't worth stopping for. His grip on her hand tightened. You are not going to die in the mud, Mallory. You are going to push, and you are going to meet your daughter, and you are going to watch her grow up. Do you hear me? Mallory's eyes focused. For one crystal clear moment, she saw him, really saw him, and something passed between them that neither could name. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Okay. The next contraction came like a freight train. Mallory screamed, not a scream of defeat but of defiance, and pushed with everything she had left. Alexander watched in awe as a tiny head emerged into his waiting hands. Dark hair, perfect ears, a face scrunched in protest against the cold and the rain and the violence of being born. The head's out, he reported to the dispatcher, his voice cracking on the words. Oh my God, the head's out. Good. Now wait for the next contraction. The shoulders will follow. 30 seconds of eternity. Then Mallory pushed again, and a tiny, slippery body slid into Alexander's arms. He caught her. Lily. She was blue. Silent. Still. She's not crying. Mallory gasped. Why isn't she crying? Why isn't my baby crying? Alexander stared at the tiny creature in his hands. So small, so fragile, so utterly dependent on him doing exactly the right thing in a moment he was completely unprepared for. "Sir, I need you to clear the baby's airway," the dispatcher instructed. "Use your finger to gently sweep any mucus from her mouth and nose." His hands moved on autopilot. Finger in mouth. Sweep. Clear. Nothing. She's still not breathing. Rub her back firmly. Stimulate her. Alexander rubbed, patted, begged silently. "Come on, little one. Come on." 3 seconds. 5 seconds. 7 seconds. And then, a sound. Thin at first. Weak. Uncertain. Then stronger. Angrier. A full-throated wail of outrage at being dragged into this cold, wet, unforgiving world. Lily was crying. Lily was alive. Mallory burst into tears, great heaving sobs of relief and exhaustion and overwhelming love. Alexander placed the screaming infant on her mother's chest, covering them both with the emergency blanket. "You did it," he said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. Thick, emotional, wrong. "Mallory, you did it." She didn't answer. She was too busy staring at her daughter, touching her tiny fingers, counting. Her tiny toes sobbing words of love that were meant for no one else's ears. Alexander watched them, and something inside him, something he had believed was dead, stirred to life. Now, before we continue with this story, I need to ask you something. If you're still here, if this story has grabbed you by the throat and refused to let go, then you're exactly the kind of person this channel was made for. Stories about redemption, about second chances, about broken people finding their way back to wholeness. That's what we do here. So if you haven't already, take 1 second to hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell. Because what happens next in Mallory and Alexander's story, it's going to break your heart. It's going to make you angry. And it's going to remind you why love is worth fighting for. Don't miss it. Subscribe now. Red and blue lights finally cut through the darkness. The ambulance arrived 12 minutes after Lily took her first breath, 12 minutes that felt like 12 hours. Paramedics swarmed the scene, barking orders, pushing Alexander aside, loading Mallory onto a stretcher, while she clutched her newborn daughter to her chest like someone might try to steal her. "Sir, we need to get her to the hospital immediately," one of the paramedics said. Young guy, couldn't have been older than 25, eyes wide as he took in the blood, the mud, the billionaire in the ruined cashmere coat. "She's lost a lot of blood. The baby needs to be evaluated. We need to move now." Alexander nodded numbly. He watched them load Mallory into the ambulance. Watched the doors slam shut. Watched the vehicle pull away. Sirens screaming. Lights painting the rain in shades of emergency. And then she was gone. Just like that. A woman he had known for less than an hour, a woman whose blood was still drying on his hands, had disappeared. Into the night, and Alexander Devereaux was left standing on the side of I-95 with nothing but questions. Who was she? Where had she come from? Would she survive? Would the baby? Harold appeared at his elbow, holding an umbrella that was laughably pointless given how thoroughly soaked Alexander already was. "Sir, we should get you back in the car. You'll catch pneumonia standing out here." Alexander didn't move. He was staring at the spot where Mallory had collapsed, at the dark stain on the asphalt that the rain was slowly washing away, at the broken-down Honda Civic that still sat abandoned on the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking weakly like a dying heartbeat. "Sir, find out which hospital they're taking her to. Sir, it's nearly 1 a.m. Your meeting with the Tokyo investors is in 6 hours. Perhaps we should—" I said, "Find out which hospital." Harold hesitated. In 22 years of service, he had never heard that tone from Alexander before. Something raw beneath the command. Something almost desperate. "Of course, sir." 3 hours later, Alexander sat in the waiting room of St. Vincent's Medical Center, still wearing his blood-stained clothes. He had refused to go home, refused to change, refused to do anything except sit in this plastic chair beneath these harsh lights and wait for news about a woman he didn't know. It made no sense. He had built his entire empire on ruthless logic. Every decision calculated, every relationship transactional, every emotion suppressed beneath layers of control so thick that even he had forgotten what lay beneath. So, why was he here? Why couldn't he stop seeing her face, hearing her voice, feeling the grip of her hand as she pushed her daughter into the world? Everyone leaves. Everyone always leaves. The words haunted him, because he recognized them, because he had thought them himself a long time ago in a different life, before he had learned to stop wanting anyone to stay. Mr. Devereaux. He looked up. A doctor stood before him, middle-aged woman, tired eyes, scrub spotted with what might have been blood. The woman from the highway, Mallory Grant. She's out of surgery. Surgery? There was significant hemorrhaging. We had to perform an emergency procedure to stop the bleeding. The doctor paused, and Alexander felt his heart stop with her. She's stable now. She'll need to stay with us for at least a week, probably longer, but she's going to be okay. Air rushed back into Alexander's lungs. And the baby. 5 pounds, 2 ounces, small but strong. She's in the NICU as a precaution, but she's breathing on her own. No major complications. The doctor tilted her head, studying him with undisguised curiosity. Are you family? No. Friend? No. Then how? I found her. Alexander stood, suddenly aware of how he must look. Muddy, bloody, wildied. A far cry from the composed titan of industry who graced magazine covers and commanded fear from competitors. I found her on the side of the road, and I couldn't just leave her. The doctor's expression softened slightly. Well, Mr. Whoever you are, you saved 2 lives tonight. That woman would have bled out if you hadn't stopped. And that baby. She shook her head. Let's just say miracles aren't something I see often in this job, but tonight I saw one. She walked away, leaving Alexander alone with the weight of her words. A miracle. He had never believed in miracles. He believed in leverage, strategy, cold, calculated moves that guaranteed victory. But standing in that hospital waiting room at 4 a.m, wearing the blood of a stranger who had looked at him like he was her last hope on earth, Alexander Devereaux couldn't help but wonder if something bigger than strategy had made him stop his car tonight. His phone buzzed, then buzzed again, then exploded with notifications. 17 missed calls from Victoria, his fiancée, 12 from his father, 8 from his assistant, 3 from numbers he didn't recognize, and 1 text message that made his blood run cold. Victoria, where the hell are you? Your father called. He knows about the highway. He knows about the woman. He's furious. Call me immediately. Alexander stared at the screen. 3 hours. He had been off the grid for 3 hours, and already his carefully constructed world was cracking at the seams. He thought about Mallory lying in a hospital bed somewhere in this building, about Lily in the NICU, fighting for every breath, about the way Mallory had looked at him when he promised not to leave, like she wanted to believe him but had been hurt too many times to risk it. Everyone leaves. Everyone always leaves. His thumb hovered over Victoria's name. He should call her, should explain, should do damage control before his father turned this into a scandal that threatened the merger they'd been negotiating for 18 months. That was the smart move, the logical move, the Alexander Devereaux move. Instead, he turned his phone off and walked toward the nurse's station. The woman who came in from the highway, he said, Mallory Grant, I need to see her. What happens next will test everything Alexander thought he knew about loyalty, love, and the lies we tell ourselves to survive. Because this story isn't just about a roadside rescue. It's about 2 broken people finding each other in the wreckage of their lives. It's about the price of redemption, and whether some debts can ever truly be repaid. It's about the secrets we bury, the wounds we hide, and the terrifying moment when someone finally sees us for who we really are. You're going to watch Alexander's empire crumble. You're going to watch Mallory fight demons she thought she'd escaped. You're going to watch 2 people who have every reason to walk away choose, again and again, to stay. There will be heartbreak. I won't lie to you about that. There will be moments when you want to scream at your screen, when you'll question whether love is worth this much pain, when you'll wonder if some people are simply too damaged to save. But there will also be redemption, not the cheap kind, not the fairy tale kind, the real kind, the kind that costs everything and rebuilds you from the ashes. That's what this story is about, and it starts with a single question, the same question that brought Alexander to his knees on a rain-soaked highway at midnight. What would you sacrifice for a stranger? The nurse led Alexander down a quiet corridor, room 317. He paused outside the door, his hand hovering over the handle. Through the small window, he could see Mallory lying in the hospital bed, pale and fragile against the white sheets. Machines beeped softly around her, and Ford dripped steady nourishment into her veins. She looked broken. She looked beautiful. She looked like someone he used to know. That's impossible, he told himself. You've never met this woman before tonight. But even as the thought formed, something cold settled in his stomach. A whisper of recognition. A fragment of memory he couldn't quite grasp. He pushed open the door. Mallory's eyes fluttered open at the sound. For a moment, she stared at him without recognition, just another face in the blur of doctors and nurses who had been poking and prodding her for hours. Then her gaze sharpened. Her lips parted, and she said the words that changed everything. "It's you." Alexander froze. "What did you say?" Mallory's eyes filled with tears, not tears of gratitude or relief, but something older, something angrier, something that looked terrifyingly like betrayal. "I said it's you." Her voice cracked on the words. "After all these years, I thought I'd never see your face again." The cold in Alexander's stomach turned to ice. "I'm sorry," he said slowly, carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. "I think you have me confused with someone else. We've never met before tonight." Mallory laughed. That broken, hysterical sound from the highway. Never met. She pushed herself up on her elbows, trembling with effort and emotion. "You really don't remember, do you? You ruined my life, and you don't even remember. I don't understand." 12 years ago. Her voice was a knife now, sharp and unforgiving. "You were 26 years old. Junior executive at your father's company. You made a decision that destroyed my entire family." Alexander's mind raced backward. 12 years. He had been ruthless back then, even more than now. Hungry, desperate to prove himself, willing to do whatever it took to climb. What had he done? What had he forgotten? "My father worked for Devereaux Industries," Mallory continued, each word landing like a blow. "He was a mid-level manager, loyal, hard-working, 23 years of service, and you fired him." The memory hit Alexander like a truck. Downsizing. 2012. He had been tasked with cutting 200 jobs to improve quarterly earnings. He hadn't looked at faces, hadn't considered families, hadn't cared about anything except the numbers. 200 names on a spreadsheet. 200 lives reduced to line items. He didn't remember any of them, but one of them remembered him. Your father. Killed himself 3 months later. Mallory's tears were falling freely now. Couldn't find another job, couldn't handle the shame, couldn't see a way forward. So he went into the garage one night while my mother was sleeping, and she couldn't finish. She didn't need to. Alexander stood frozen in the doorway, the weight of 12-year-old sins crashing down on his shoulders. He had saved this woman's life tonight, delivered her baby, held her hand while she bled, and 12 years ago, he had killed her father. Because the woman on the side of that highway was the one person he never thought he'd see again. New York City swallowed small-town girls like Mallory every single day. They arrived on buses and trains, clutching dreams too big for wherever they'd come from, convinced that the city's glittering skyline promised reinvention. Most of them burned out within months, broken by the cost of living, crushed by the indifference of strangers, sent crawling back home with their ambitions in tatters. Mallory refused to become a statistic. She arrived in Manhattan 3 weeks after her 18th birthday, her duffel bag lighter than ever after paying for the bus ticket. She had no job lined up, no apartment, no connections, no safety net. What she had was hunger, not the kind that came from missing meals, though she would know that hunger intimately in the months ahead. This was different. This was the burning, relentless need to prove that her life meant something, that her mother's sacrifices hadn't been wasted, that a girl born with nothing could build herself into something. She found a job within 48 hours. The diner was called Rosie's, though no one named Rosie had worked there in decades. It squatted on a corner in Hell's Kitchen, serving coffee that tasted like motor oil and eggs that came from cartons rather than chickens. The floors were sticky. The customers were rude. The tips were insultingly small. Mallory loved it. Not the work itself. The work was brutal. 12-hour shifts that left her feet screaming. Customers who grabbed her ass and then complained about the service. A manager named Hank who docked her pay for bathroom breaks longer than 3 minutes. But the diner represented something precious. Independence. She wasn't relying on foster families who could throw her out on a whim. Wasn't depending on systems that saw her as a burden. For the first time in her life, Mallory was standing on her own 2 feet. The standing hurt like hell, but it was hers. She rented a room in a boarding house in Queens, $400 a month. for a space barely large enough to hold a twin mattress and a plastic dresser. The bathroom was shared with 6 other tenants. The walls were thin enough to hear everything. The heating worked only when it felt like it, which was rarely, but there was a window, and from that window, if she pressed her face to the glass and craned her neck, at just the right angle, Mallory could see a sliver of the Manhattan skyline. She would sit there for hours after her shifts ended, too exhausted to sleep but too wired to close her eyes, watching the lights twinkle, watching planes cross overhead, watching the city that had swallowed so many dreamers pulse with relentless, unforgiving energy. "I'm going to make it here," she told herself. "I don't know how yet, but I'm going to make it." Community college became her lifeline. She enrolled in classes during the day and worked the evening shift at the diner, sleeping in 4-hour fragments that left her perpetually dazed. Her grades weren't stellar. There wasn't enough time for stellar, but they were solid, good enough to earn financial aid, good enough to keep her dream breathing. Nursing, that was the goal. That was the light at the end of the tunnel. Mallory wanted to become a nurse because she remembered how the nurses at her mother's hospice had treated Delilah with dignity, how they had held her hand when the pain became too much, how they had cried at the funeral, these strangers who had known her mother for only 6 weeks but had loved her anyway. She wanted to be that person for someone else. She wanted to stand at bedsides and offer comfort, to hold trembling hands, to be present in the moments when presence mattered most. The nursing program required 2 years of prerequisites before she could even apply. 2 years of juggling work and school. 2 years of instant noodles and second-hand textbooks. 2 years of telling herself that the exhaustion was temporary, that the sacrifice had a purpose, that the light at the tunnel's end was getting closer. She made it through the first year, then she made it through the second. And on the morning she was supposed to submit her nursing school application, Mallory met Marcus Webb. He was charming. That was the first thing she noticed, and the last thing she should have trusted. Marcus worked in pharmaceutical sales, a job that required him to be perpetually polished. Perfect smile, perfect hair, perfect suits that probably cost more than Mallory made in a month. He walked into Rosie's diner like he'd taken a wrong turn from a parallel universe, ordered black coffee, and left a $50 tip on a $4 check. "For your trouble," he said, sliding the bill across the counter. His eyes lingered on her name tag. "Mallory. That's beautiful. What does it mean?" "Elm tree," she said, too stunned by the tip to play it cool. "It's Welsh. Strong roots. I like that." He came back the next day, and the next, and the next. Within a week, Mallory knew his coffee order by heart. Within a month, she knew the rhythm of his laugh. Within 3 months, she had convinced herself that maybe, just maybe, her mother had been wrong about men who seemed too good to be true. Marcus pursued her with the intensity of someone closing a deal. Flowers that appeared at her boarding house door. Dinners at restaurants she couldn't afford to look at, much less eat in. Sweet, steady attention that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't since Delilah died. He listened when she talked about nursing school, encouraged her dreams, told her she was brilliant and capable and destined for greatness. He made her feel like she mattered. And after years of feeling invisible, that was the most addictive drug in the world. They moved in together after 6 months. Looking back, Mallory could see the red flags she'd ignored. The way Marcus's charm flickered off like a light switch when they were alone. The subtle jabs about her background, delivered as jokes but landing like punches. The slow, methodical way he inserted himself between her and her few friends. But at the time, she saw only what she wanted to see. A partner, a future, a family she had been craving since her mother's death. She put the nursing application on hold, just temporarily. Marcus said she was working too hard, said she needed to rest, said there was no rush, that he made enough money for both of them, that she should focus on enjoying life for once. It sounded like love. It felt like a cage. But Mallory didn't recognize the bars until they had already closed around her. The 2 pink lines appeared on a Tuesday morning. Mallory sat on the bathroom floor of Marcus's apartment. Their apartment, he always corrected her, though his name was the only one on the lease, and stared at the pregnancy test with something that felt like vertigo. Pregnant. She was pregnant. The word rattled around her skull, refusing to settle into meaning. She was 24 years old, unmarried, unemployed, technically, since Marcus had convinced her to quit the diner 6 months ago. completely financially dependent on a man whose moods had become increasingly unpredictable. And now she was pregnant. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone. Marcus was at work. He wouldn't be home for hours. She had time to process this. Time to figure out how she felt before she had to figure out how he would react. But even as she tried to organize her thoughts, something unexpected was happening in her chest. Joy. Terrifying, irrational, undeniable joy. She had never planned to become a mother. Not like this, anyway. Not before her career was established. Not before she had savings and stability and all the things she'd promised herself she would achieve before bringing a child into the world. But her hand moved to her belly anyway, pressing flat against skin that still looked the same but suddenly felt different. There was a life inside her. A tiny, fragile, impossible life that had somehow taken root in the chaos of her existence. "You exist," she whispered to the life she couldn't yet feel. "You matter." Her mother's words. Her mother's prayer. And in that moment, sitting on cold tile with a positive pregnancy test clutched in her shaking hand, Mallory made a decision that would alter everything. She was keeping this baby. She didn't know how. Didn't know if Marcus would support her. Didn't know where the money would come from, or how she would manage, or what the future held. But she knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that this child was meant to be born. This child was her second chance. Marcus came home at 7:15. Mallory had spent the day rehearsing what she would say. She'd cleaned the apartment obsessively, cooked his favorite meal, changed into the dress he liked best. She had crafted a speech about partnership and future, and building something beautiful together. The speech died in her throat when she saw his face. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. His jaw was tight, his eyes flat in that way that had started to frighten her. "Nothing. Long day." He poured himself a scotch without offering her anything. "Didn't close the Henderson account. My manager's riding my ass. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be useful." He gestured at the kitchen. "Is dinner ready?" Mallory served him in silence, her hands trembling slightly as she plated the chicken she'd spent 2 hours preparing. She waited until he'd had 3 bites. 4, until some of the tension had drained from his shoulders. "Marcus, I need to tell you something. Can it wait? I'm exhausted." "It's important." He sighed the way he always sighed when she required his attention. Like she was an inconvenience. Like her needs were burdens. "Fine." "What?" Mallory took a breath. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was surgical. Marcus set down his fork, took a long sip of scotch, stared at her with an expression she couldn't read. "You're sure?" "I took 3 tests. They were all positive. I have a doctor's appointment scheduled for—" "How did this happen?" The question landed like a slap. Mallory blinked. "What do you mean, how did it happen?" "The usual way. We were careful. We weren't always careful. Remember last month when—" "Don't." His voice had dropped to something dangerous. "Don't try to put this on me." Mallory felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. This wasn't the reaction she'd feared. Exactly. She had braced for shock, for uncertainty, for the need to reassure him. But something darker lurked beneath his words. "I'm not putting anything on you. I'm telling you we're having a baby. I thought you'd be—" "What? Happy?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mallory, I'm 31 years old. I'm in the middle of the most important year of my career, and you expect me to be happy about an accident that's going to derail everything? It doesn't have to derail anything. We can figure this out together. We can—" "We?" He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "There is no we in this decision you've apparently already made." Mallory's heart stuttered. "What does that mean?" Marcus crossed to the window, his back to her. When he spoke again, his voice was cold and corporate. The voice he used on calls with difficult clients. "It means that if you want to keep this baby, you're doing it alone. I never agreed to be a father. I never asked for this. And I'm not going to let some broken condom ruin everything I've worked for." The words hung in the air between them. Broken condom. Accident. Ruin. Mallory thought about the life growing inside her. About the joy she'd felt that morning, pure and unexpected. About her mother's voice whispering across the years. "Don't let the hard times make you hard, baby girl." "Okay," she heard herself say. Marcus turned, surprised. Okay, I'll do it alone." She didn't know where the words came from. Didn't know where the strength came from. But they were true. truer than anything she'd said in months. She would rather raise this baby in poverty than raise it with a man who saw its existence as an inconvenience. Marcus's expression flickered, shock, then anger, then something that looked almost like fear. "You're serious?" "Yes. You'll have nothing. You have no job, no savings, nothing. I'll figure it out." "Like you figured out nursing school?" The words were designed to wound. "Like you figured out how to support yourself before I came along?" "Face it, Mallory. You're not equipped for this. You've never been equipped for anything." She should have crumbled. 3 months ago, she would have. But something had shifted. Something had woken up. "Maybe not," she said quietly. "But I'm going to try anyway. Because this baby deserves someone who wants it. And you clearly don't." She walked to the bedroom and started packing. Behind her, Marcus said nothing. He let her go without a fight. That told her everything she needed to know about what their relationship had really been. The first month wasn't the hardest. Mallory had adrenaline on her side. The fierce, protective instinct of a mother-to-be. The determination to prove Marcus wrong, to prove everyone wrong, to build something beautiful from the wreckage of her dreams. She found a room in a women's shelter 40 minutes from the city. It was cramped and noisy and smelled faintly of industrial cleaner, but it was safe. The staff helped her apply for benefits, helped her find a job at a grocery store, helped her schedule prenatal appointments at a clinic that served patients on a sliding scale. For a few precious weeks, Mallory believed she could do this. Then reality began to chip away at her resolve. The job paid $11.50 an hour. 20 hours a week was all the manager would give her, enough to disqualify her from certain assistance programs, but not enough to actually survive on. She did the math obsessively, lying awake in her narrow shelter bed. $920 a month before taxes. Rent for even the cheapest studio apartment in the area was $1,200. The numbers didn't work. No matter how many times she rearranged them, no matter how many corners she cut, the numbers refused to cooperate. She started picking up odd jobs, babysitting, cleaning houses, selling plasma twice a week until the clinic told her she had to stop because the pregnancy made it unsafe. Every dollar was accounted for. Every cent was a small victory against impossible odds. But she was drowning in slow motion, and no one was throwing her a rope. Her sister, Meredith, was supposed to be the rope. Meredith was 7 years older. Same father, different mother, raised in a different house with a different set of advantages. She had escaped their family's poverty through marriage, landing a corporate attorney who provided the kind of stability Mallory had only ever dreamed of. They had never been close, but blood was blood, and Mallory was desperate. The phone call lasted 4 minutes. "I just need somewhere to stay," Mallory pleaded, pressing the phone hard against her ear in the shelter's common room. "Just until I get on my feet. I can sleep on the couch. I'll help with cooking, cleaning, whatever you need. Mallory." Meredith's voice was patient in a way that felt condescending. "I would love to help you. I really would. But Richard and I are in the middle of renovating the guest suite, and the kids have their schedules, and honestly, I don't think it would be healthy for you to be around all of this right now. You need to focus on yourself. Focus on yourself." Code for, "You are not my problem." "I am focusing on myself," Mallory said quietly. "I'm focusing on not becoming homeless while I'm 5 months pregnant." Silence on the other end. "Then, have you considered, options?" The word landed like a blade. "I'm keeping my baby, Meredith. I'm just saying, it's not too late, and given your circumstances, my circumstances are that I need help from my sister." More silence, then a sigh. "I wish I could, Mallory. I really do. But it's just not a good time. Maybe after the renovation is done. Maybe in a few months. A few months. By then, she would either have figured it out, or she would have lost everything." Meredith wasn't offering help. She was offering an exit from her own guilt. The quiet humiliations accumulated like stones in her pockets. There was the landlord who looked at her pregnant belly and suddenly remembered that the apartment had already been rented. The job interview where the manager's eyes dropped to her stomach and the questions became perfunctory. The prenatal appointment where the nurse asked casually if the father would be present for the birth. "No," Mallory said. "He's not in the picture." The nurse made a note in her file without comment. But Mallory saw the judgment in her eyes. Saw it everywhere now. In the way cashiers handed over her WIC vouchers. In the way strangers on the bus shifted away from her when they noticed. her swollen belly and bare ring finger, in the way the world constantly reminded her that a pregnant woman alone was an object of pity at best and contempt at worst. She learned to armor herself against the small cruelties, but they left bruises anyway. The phone calls from Marcus started in her 6th month, not calls of reconciliation, not calls of concern, calls of erasure. "I'm having my lawyer draft paperwork," he said flatly when she answered the first one. "I want to be clear that I have no intention of being involved with this child, financially, legally, or otherwise. Marcus, I'll need you to sign documents terminating my parental rights. In exchange, I won't pursue reimbursement for the money I spent supporting you during our relationship." The audacity of it stole her breath. Reimbursement? For what? Rent, food, clothes. You lived in my apartment for over a year, Mallory. That has a value. He was threatening to sue her for the crime of being his girlfriend. "I'm not signing anything," she said. "Then I'll make your life very difficult. I have resources you can't imagine, and I have a child who deserves to know its father isn't a monster." She hung up before he could respond. Her hands were shaking, but her voice hadn't wavered. The calls continued for weeks. Then the texts, then the emails, then the letters from attorneys with intimidating letterheads and language designed to frighten. Marcus was erasing himself from his daughter's life, and he was doing it with the same ruthless efficiency he brought to closing deals. Mallory saved every message, not because she planned to fight him. She couldn't afford a lawyer, couldn't afford anything, but because someday her daughter might ask. Someday, Lily might want to understand why her father wasn't there, and Mallory would have proof that she hadn't driven him away. He had run, just like her own father had run, just like everyone always ran. By her 7th month, the isolation was complete. Meredith had stopped returning her calls. The friends she'd made at the shelter had moved on to their own struggles. The father of her child had legally disavowed her. She was utterly, devastatingly alone. And yet, her daughter kicked. Every night, lying in her cramped shelter bed, Mallory would feel tiny limbs pressing against the walls of her womb. Tiny feet, tiny hands, tiny proof that she wasn't completely alone after all. "I've got you," she whispered into the darkness, hands pressed flat against her belly. "I know everyone else has left, but I'm not going anywhere. I promise." The baby kicked again, and Mallory allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Doubt came for her at 3 in the morning. It always came at 3 in the morning, that hour when the shelter was quiet and the darkness felt absolute, and every fear she'd suppressed during daylight hours crawled out to feast on her resolve. What if she couldn't do this? What if she was setting her daughter up for the same struggles she'd endured? The poverty, the instability, the constant feeling of not being enough. What if keeping this baby was the most selfish thing she'd ever done? The adoption counselor at the clinic was kind, too kind, in a way that felt calculated. She laid out brochures on the table between them, glossy images of smiling couples who could to conceive, who had nurseries already decorated and college funds already started. "These are wonderful families," the counselor said softly. "Stable, loving. They could give your daughter opportunities that—" She stopped herself, but Mallory heard the rest of the sentence anyway. "Opportunities that you can't provide." "I understand," Mallory said carefully. "I've thought about it. I've thought about it every single day since I found out I was pregnant. And I'm keeping her." The counselor's expression flickered. Not disappointment exactly, but something adjacent. "Can I ask why?" Mallory was silent for a long moment. How could she explain it? How could she articulate the fierce, irrational certainty that this child was meant to be hers? That despite every obstacle, despite every logical reason to choose differently, something in her soul refused to let go? "Because I know what it feels like to be given away," she finally said. "My father left when I was 2. My mother died when I was 17. I spent a year in foster care being passed around like an inconvenience." She looked down at her belly, swollen now to the point where she couldn't see her feet. "I swore I would never make a child feel that way. I swore that if I ever became a mother, I would stay. No matter how hard it got, no matter what I had to sacrifice, I would stay." The counselor was quiet. "Even if staying means struggling? Even then? Even if your daughter might have an easier life with another family?" Mallory met her eyes. "My mother struggled. She worked double shifts and wore secondhand clothes and went to bed hungry so I could eat. And I never once, not for a single second, wished she had given me to someone else." She stood, gathering her coat around her. Lily is going to know she's loved. That's not something money can buy. That's not something stable families can guarantee. That's something I can give her. And I will. She walked out before the counselor could respond. Her hands were trembling, but her heart was still. The bleeding started at 37 weeks. Mallory had been experiencing minor complications throughout her pregnancy. High blood pressure, occasional spotting, the kind of issues that required monitoring but not necessarily intervention. Her doctor had put her on modified bed rest for the final month. But bed rest required a bed. And the shelter's policy was clear. Residents could stay for a maximum of 90 days. Mallory's time was up. She had found a room to rent, a tiny space above a laundromat in a town 40 miles outside the city. It wasn't much, but it was hers. First month's rent plus deposit had consumed every dollar she'd saved, but the landlord had agreed to let her move in that weekend. She just had to make it 3 more days. The cramps started on a Thursday evening. At first, Mallory dismissed them. Braxton Hicks, contractions. Practice for the real thing. She'd been having them for weeks, but these felt different, sharper, more insistent. And then she saw the blood, just a little at first. Pink staining on her underwear when she went to the bathroom. Nothing to panic about, she told herself. The doctor had warned her about spotting, but by midnight, the pink had turned red. And by 2 in the morning, Mallory knew something was wrong. She called the clinic first. The after-hours line rang and rang and rang before finally connecting to a recording. Our office is currently closed. If this is a medical emergency, please call 911 or proceed to your nearest emergency room. Mallory didn't have insurance for an emergency room visit. The sliding scale clinic in the city was 40 miles away. But they knew her. They had her records. They could help. She made a decision that would nearly cost her everything. She would drive herself. The Honda Civic had been purchased for $800 from a mechanic who'd warned her it was on its last legs. "She'll get you from A to B," he'd said, patting the rusted hood. But I wouldn't count on her for much more than that. Mallory hadn't needed much more than that. She just needed to get to the clinic. The rain started 20 minutes into the drive. Light at first, then heavier, then a full-blown deluge that turned the highway into a river of reflected taillights. Mallory gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands, leaning forward to peer through the windshield. The cramps were coming faster now. Every few minutes, a wave of pressure would sweep through her abdomen, stealing her breath and blurring her vision. She would wait for it to pass, then press the accelerator a little harder. Just get to the clinic. Just get to the clinic. Just get to... The engine coughed. Mallory's heart seized. No, not now, please, not now. The engine coughed again, sputtered, died. The car coasted silently through the rain, losing speed, losing momentum, losing everything. Mallory managed to steer onto the shoulder before it stopped completely, and then she was stranded. 37 weeks pregnant, bleeding, alone on a highway in the middle of a thunderstorm with a dead car and a dying phone. She called 911 first. "All operators are currently busy. Please remain on the line. Your call is important to us." Important. Her call was important. She was bleeding in the dark on the side of I-95, and her call was important. Mallory screamed at the automated voice. Screamed until her throat was raw. Then she dropped the phone and let her head fall back against the seat. The cramps were coming faster now, closer together, taking on a rhythm that she recognized from every birthing book she'd devoured in the clinic's waiting room. Contractions. Real contractions. Her daughter was coming. Here. Now. In this dead car on this flooded highway with no one coming to help. She stumbled out of the car because she couldn't bear to be trapped inside. The rain hit her like a physical assault. Cold. Relentless. Punishing. Within seconds, her hospital gown was soaked through, clinging to her body like a second skin. She had worn the gown because she'd planned to go straight to the clinic, because she'd thought she was prepared. She hadn't been prepared for this. Cars passed, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Headlights illuminated her for split seconds before disappearing into the storm. Each one was a silent rejection. Each one was proof that she was invisible. Mallory screamed for help until her voice gave out. No one stopped. She collapsed against the hood of the Civic when her legs refused to hold her anymore. The metal was cold against her back. Rain streamed into her eyes, her mouth, her ears. She couldn't feel her fingers. Couldn't feel anything except the relentless pressure between her hips and the certainty that she was going to die here. Everyone leaves, she thought deliriously. Everyone always leaves. Her mother had left. Her father had left. Marcus had left. Meredith had left. And now even God was leaving, watching her bleed out on the side of a highway without lifting a finger. She was fading when the headlights slowed. At first she thought she was hallucinating. She'd watched so many cars pass without stopping that the concept of someone actually braking seemed impossible. But the black Range Rover pulled onto the shoulder. A door opened. A figure emerged into the rain. And Mallory Grant, for the first time in 23 minutes, allowed herself to hope. The first real contraction hit like a fist from the inside. Mallory was still behind the wheel when it happened, knuckles white, against the steering column, eyes straining through sheets of rain. One moment she was calculating the distance to the clinic, 18 miles, maybe 20. The next, her entire abdomen seized with a force that stole the oxygen from her lungs. She gasped, couldn't scream, couldn't breathe, could only grip the wheel and ride the wave of pressure that threatened to split her in half. 30 seconds, 45, 60, then release. Mallory sagged forward, forehead pressed against the steering wheel, panting like she'd sprinted a marathon. Sweat mixed with the rainwater that had somehow seeped through the window seals. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely keep them on the wheel. That wasn't Braxton Hicks, she thought with terrifying clarity. That was real. That was labor. She was still 18 miles from help. And her body had just declared war. The second contraction came 7 minutes later. This time she was ready for it, or thought she was. She pulled her foot off the accelerator as the pressure began to build, letting the car coast while her body did whatever ancient, brutal thing it needed to do. But readiness meant nothing against that kind of pain. Mallory heard herself making sounds she didn't recognize. Animal sounds, guttural, desperate, primal. Her vision tunneled until all she could see was the blur of rain on the windshield. The smear of distant taillights, the darkness pressing in from every direction. Breathe, she commanded herself. You have to breathe. But breathing required thought, and thought had abandoned her. There was only the contraction, only the pressure, only the mounting certainty that her body was doing something irreversible. When it finally released, Mallory was crying, not from fear, though fear was there, crouching in the shadows of her mind. She was crying from sheer overwhelm, from the realization that she was completely, utterly alone in this moment, that no one was coming, that she would have to survive this through willpower alone. Her mother's voice drifted through the chaos. You're going to be extraordinary, baby girl. Even when you don't believe it yourself. I don't feel extraordinary, Mallory whispered to the empty car. I feel like I'm dying. But she pressed the accelerator anyway. 18 miles. She could make it 18 miles. The engine coughed for the first time at mile marker 147. Mallory's heart lurched into her throat. She knew that sound, had heard it twice before in the 3 months she'd owned this rusted heap of barely functional machinery. It was the sound of something critical failing, the sound of luck running out. No, she pleaded, pressing the accelerator harder. Come on, just a little further, please. The Civic responded with a wheeze that sounded almost apologetic. I'm trying, it seemed to say, but I've got nothing left. Neither did Mallory. The third contraction hit as the engine began to stutter. This one was worse than the first two, longer, sharper, accompanied by a gush of warmth between her legs that she refused to look at. She knew what it meant, knew that the bleeding was getting worse, knew that every minute she spent on this highway was a minute her daughter might not have. The car jerked beneath her. Mallory's foot pressed the accelerator to the floor. Nothing. The engine wheezed again, coughed, and then fell silent. Momentum carried the Civic forward for another 100 yards, the steering wheel growing heavy in Mallory's hands as power steering failed. She wrestled with it, arms screaming, vision blurred by pain and tears and rain. Somehow, she would never know how, she managed to guide the dying vehicle onto the shoulder. It rolled to a stop with a final, defeated shudder. And then, there was only silence. Mallory sat frozen for a long moment, hands still gripping the wheel of a car that would never move again. Rain hammered the roof like accusations. You should have called an ambulance. You should have stayed at the shelter. You should have given her up for adoption when you had the chance. The thoughts were vicious, invasive, impossible to silence. They circled like vultures, waiting for her to give up so they could feast. She didn't give up. She reached for her phone. The screen glowed with 4% battery. Mallory stared at that number like it was a death sentence. 4%. Maybe 5 minutes of life if she was lucky. 5 minutes to summon help, to explain where she was, to convince someone that a pregnant woman bleeding on the side of I-95 was worth saving. She dialed 911. Ring, ring, ring. All operators are currently busy. Please remain on the line. Your call is important to us. The automated voice was calm, pleasant, utterly inhuman. It didn't know that Mallory was in labor. Didn't know that her baby was coming too fast and too early. Didn't know that every second of hold time was a second she couldn't afford to lose. Please, Mallory begged the recording. Please, I need help. Someone answer. Please. The hold music played on. Some generic orchestral arrangement designed to soothe anxious callers. It had the opposite effect on Mallory. Every synthetic note felt like mockery. Every passing second felt like abandonment. The phone screen dimmed. 3. Another contraction. This one drove Mallory forward against the steering wheel, her forehead, slamming into the hard plastic with enough force to leave a bruise. She screamed into the confined space of the car, screamed until her throat felt like it was bleeding, while the hold music played serenely in her ear. Your call is important to us. Your call is important to us. Your call is... The phone died. The screen went black without warning, without mercy, without giving her a chance to say goodbye to the only connection she had to the outside world. Mallory stared at the dead device in her hand. Then she threw it at the passenger seat and screamed again. Not from pain this time. From rage. Pure incandescent rage at a world that had failed her at every turn. At a system that put pregnant women on hold while they bled. At a universe that seemed determined to prove that she didn't matter. That her daughter didn't matter. That they were both disposable, forgettable, invisible. The rage sustained her for exactly 30 seconds. Then it collapsed into something far more dangerous. Despair. She stumbled out of the car because the walls were closing in. The rain hit her like a physical assault, cold, relentless, punishing. Within seconds her hospital gown was soaked through, plastered against her swollen belly like a second skin. Her bare feet splashed through puddles that soaked through to the bone. But she couldn't stay in that car. Couldn't sit in that tomb of silence and failed machinery and wait for death to find her. At least out here, she could try. The first car passed at 70 miles per hour. Headlights swept across Mallory like a spotlight, illuminating her for one blinding second before disappearing into the darkness. She waved her arms, screamed until her voice cracked, jumped up and down despite the agony radiating through her pelvis. The car didn't slow, didn't hesitate, didn't acknowledge her existence at all. The second car passed 30 seconds later. This one was a minivan. Through the rain-streaked windows, Mallory caught a glimpse of a woman in the driver's seat, hands at 10 and 2, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Look at me, Mallory pleaded silently. Just look at me. The woman didn't look. The minivan vanished into the storm. The third car was a pickup truck with oversized tires that threw sheets of water across the shoulder as it passed. The spray hit Mallory like a slap, knocking her back against her dead Civic. She lost her footing, went down hard on one knee, felt gravel bite into her skin. The truck kept going. Of course it did. They all kept going. One after another, sedans and SUVs and 18-wheelers that roared past with enough force to shake the ground beneath her feet. Each one was a rejection. Each one was proof of what she had always feared. She was invisible, pregnant and bleeding and dying in the rain, and she was completely, utterly invisible. Everyone leaves, the darkness whispered. Everyone always leaves. Why did you think this would be different? Mallory had no answer. She knelt on the shoulder of I-95, rain streaming down her face, like tears, and watched the world ignore her with perfect indifference. A Mercedes passed. The driver glanced in her direction. She saw his head turn, saw the flash of recognition, and then he accelerated, chose not to stop, chose his schedule over her survival. A convertible with its top up flew by so close that the wind nearly knocked her over. A police car, an actual police car, blazed past with its lights off, probably en route to some other emergency. Some other victim. Some other person who mattered more than she did. Mallory stopped waving. Stopped screaming. Stopped doing anything except kneeling in the rain, arms wrapped around her belly, waiting for whatever came next. Time became strange. Contractions came and went. She lost count of how many. The pain blurred into a continuous wall of pressure that ebbed and flowed like a tide she couldn't control. Minutes stretched into hours. Hours compressed into seconds. She couldn't tell if she'd been on this highway for 20 minutes or 20 years. The only constant was Lily. Is she okay? The thoughts circled endlessly. Is she still alive in there? Is she fighting? Is she scared? Mallory pressed her hands against her belly, desperate to feel movement. Desperate for some sign that her daughter was still with her. A kick. Weak, but present. I'm still here, Mama. Tears streamed down Mallory's face, indistinguishable from rain. I know, baby. I know you're still here. Just hold on. Please hold on. Between contractions, her mother came to her. Not literally. Mallory knew she was hallucinating, knew the trauma and blood loss were playing tricks on her mind. But she could see Delilah standing at the edge of the highway, watching her, with that soft, sad smile she'd worn during the final weeks of her life. You're stronger than you know, baby girl. I'm not strong enough for this, Mama. I can't do this alone. You've never been alone. I've always been with you. Then help me, please. Tell me what to do. Delilah's image flickered in the rain. Stay alive. That's all you have to do. Stay alive, and help will come. How do you know? Because you deserve it. Because Lily deserves it. Because some stories don't end in tragedy. Another contraction hit, and when Mallory opened her eyes, her mother was gone. But the words remained. Stay alive. Help will come. She dragged herself to her feet. Every muscle screamed in protest. Every joint felt like it was filled with broken glass. The bleeding had slowed slightly. Or maybe she was just too numb to feel it anymore. But the contractions were coming faster now. Closer together, building toward something she couldn't stop. Mallory leaned against the Civic's hood and focused on breathing. In for 4 counts. Out for 4 counts. Simple. Rhythmic. Survivable. She would breathe through this. She would breathe until someone stopped. She would breathe until Lily was safe. The highway sounds became a symphony of abandonment. Rain drumming on metal, engines roaring past, tires hissing through standing water, the occasional blast of a horn, though whether in warning or mockery she couldn't tell. And beneath it all, the click of her dead engine cooling. Tick, 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 like a countdown, like a timer running out. The memory came without warning. She was 8 years old, standing in the kitchen while her mother iced a birthday cake. They couldn't afford candles that year, so Delilah had stuck a single match into the frosting and called it rustic. Make a wish, baby girl. Mallory had squeezed her eyes shut, thinking hard. I wish for a family, she'd said. A big one. With lots of people who love me and never go away. Delilah's smile had faltered for just a moment. That's a beautiful wish, sweetheart. You hold on to that. She had held on to it. For 20 years, she had held on to the dream of belonging somewhere, of being surrounded by people who chose her, of never feeling this alone again. And now, here she was, bleeding on a highway, abandoned by the world, still wishing. Headlights appeared in the distance. Mallory barely registered them anymore. Dozens had passed, hundreds. None had stopped. None would stop. She was furniture now, scenery, a cautionary tale that drivers would mention to their families over dinner. Saw a woman on the side of the road tonight. Looked pregnant. Probably drugs. Did you stop? In this rain? Are you crazy? She almost didn't look up. But something made her lift her head. Something made her squint through the sheets of rain at the approaching vehicle. It was black. Expensive. The kind of car that belonged to people who lived in a different universe. It was slowing down. Mallory blinked, certain she was hallucinating again. But the brake lights flared red in the darkness. The car pulled onto the shoulder. A door opened, and a man stepped out into the rain. He was tall, well-dressed, completely out of place on this stretch of highway in the middle of a thunderstorm. He moved toward her with purpose, his expensive coat already darkening with water, his polished shoes splashing through puddles without hesitation. Mallory tried to speak, but another contraction stole her voice. She doubled over, clutching her belly, feeling her legs give way beneath her. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground. I've got you, a voice said. Deep, commanding, strangely gentle. I've got you. You're not alone anymore. Not alone. For the first time in 23 minutes, for the first time in years, Mallory wasn't alone. She looked up at the stranger's face, rain streaming between them, and felt something she'd almost forgotten how to feel: hope. Alexander Calder Devereaux was not born a billionaire. He was born in a 2-room apartment above a laundromat in South Boston, where the walls shook every time. The industrial dryers ran and the smell of detergent seeped into everything: clothes, furniture, dreams. His mother, Elena, worked the counter downstairs, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, sorting other people's dirty laundry for $4.75 an hour. She came home each night with hands cracked and bleeding from the chemicals, but she never complained. Complaining required energy she didn't have. His father was a different story. Richard Devereaux Sr. had been a promising attorney once, Harvard Law, top of his class, the kind of trajectory that should have led to corner offices and country clubs. Instead, it led to a bottle, then another bottle, then a spiral of unemployment, bitterness, and violence that ended only when he wrapped his car around a telephone pole when Alexander was 11. The inheritance was $47,000 in debt, and a lesson Alexander never forgot: weakness destroyed everything. His father had been weak, had buckled under pressure, had chosen escape over responsibility, leaving a widow and a child to clean up the wreckage of his failures. Alexander swore he would never be weak. He would never buckle. He would never stop moving long enough for failure to catch him. The scholarship to prep school changed everything. Alexander was 14 when a recruiter from Phillips Exeter noticed his test scores, off the charts despite the chaos of his home life, and offered him a full ride. His mother cried when she read the acceptance letter, cried harder when she put him on the bus that would carry him to a world she could never enter. "Don't forget where you came from," she said, pressing a worn photograph into his palm. It showed the two of them standing outside the laundromat, Elena's arm around her son, both of them squinting into the sun. "Don't forget who loved you first." Alexander tucked the photograph into his wallet. He still carried it, 24 years later. But somewhere along the way, he had forgotten what it meant. Prep school taught him the rules of a game he hadn't known existed. Money spoke its own language, one of old names and older money, of summer, homes and trust funds, and casual cruelty toward anyone who didn't belong. Alexander arrived with 2 pairs of pants, 3 shirts, and an accent that marked him as an outsider before he opened his mouth. The other boys smelled blood immediately. They hazed him relentlessly during freshman year, stole his clothes, urinated in his shoes, left dead animals in his bed. They wanted him to break, to go crying back to whatever slum had spawned him, to prove that the scholarship program was a waste of resources. Alexander didn't break. He adapted. He studied his tormentors with the same intensity he brought to academics, learned their weaknesses, cataloged their secrets, and when the moment was right, he struck. By sophomore year, the boy who had led the hazing campaign was expelled for cheating, evidence mysteriously appearing in the dean's mailbox. By junior year, Alexander had remade himself entirely. New accent, new posture, new smile that revealed nothing and promised everything. The photograph in his wallet was the only remnant of the boy he had been. By senior year, he was untouchable, and he had learned the most important lesson of his life. Power was protection. Accumulate enough of it, and no one could ever hurt you again. Harvard was a formality. He graduated summa cum laude with a degree in economics, then added an MBA from Wharton because one Ivy League credential wasn't enough. Recruiters from Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, and a dozen other firms fought for his attention. He fielded their offers with the cold calculation of a chess master, choosing each move for maximum strategic advantage. By 25, he was a junior partner at the most prestigious private equity firm in New York. By 28, he had orchestrated his first hostile takeover, a struggling manufacturing company he gutted, restructured, and sold for a 400% profit. By 30, he had left to start his own firm. By 32, he had made his first billion. The business press called him a genius, a visionary, a titan. They didn't know that every deal, every acquisition, every ruthless decision was driven by the same terror that had gripped him as a child watching his father stumble through the door reeking of whiskey. The terror of becoming nothing, of stopping, of being left behind. Movement was Alexander's religion. He woke at 4:30 every morning without an alarm. His body had been trained to reject stillness. By 5, he was in the gym, pushing through punishing workouts that left his muscles screaming, By 6:30, he was reviewing overnight market movements from Asia and Europe. By 8, he was in the office, already 3 hours ahead of colleagues who thought they were arriving early. He measured his life in velocity, deals closed per quarter, companies acquired per year, net worth growth percentage, every metric trending upward, always upward, because the alternative was unthinkable. His calendar was a testament to this obsession. 15-minute blocks scheduled from dawn to midnight, meals eaten standing up or in the back of cars traveling between meetings, vacations that weren't vacations at all, just work conducted from slightly more scenic locations. He hadn't taken a true day off in 7 years, hadn't slept more than 5 hours in a decade, hadn't allowed himself to stop, to breathe, to simply exist without purpose. Because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant confronting truths he had spent his entire adult life outrunning. His penthouse was a museum of achievement. 43rd floor of a building he owned outright. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Art collection worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Every surface pristine, every detail curated, every element designed to project success. But Alexander rarely saw any of it. He worked in the penthouse, had a home office that rivaled most corporate boardrooms, but he didn't live there. Living required presence, required settling into spaces, required the kind of stillness that made his skin crawl. Most nights he fell asleep at his desk with his laptop still open. Most mornings he woke disoriented, unsure for a moment which city he was in, which deal he was closing, which version of himself he was supposed to perform that day. The penthouse had a bedroom he'd used perhaps a dozen times since purchasing the property. It had a kitchen that had never cooked a meal. It had a living room with $200,000 worth of furniture that no one had ever sat on. It was not a home. It was a monument to a man too afraid to stop building. His staff learned quickly not to expect humanity. Alexander didn't do small talk, didn't remember birthdays, didn't ask about families or hobbies or anything that existed outside the boundaries of work. He compensated well, generously even, but the money was transactional, a fair exchange for excellence, nothing more. He's not cruel, his longest-serving assistant once told a new hire. He's just absent. Like there's a person-shaped hole where a person should be. The description was more accurate than she knew. Alexander had hollowed himself out deliberately, methodically, over the course of 2 decades. Every emotion that threatened to slow him down, grief, loneliness, love, had been excised like a tumor. What remained was efficient, profitable, relentless, and utterly, devastatingly empty. But emptiness was preferable to pain. At least, that's what he told himself during the rare moments when the silence became loud enough to hear. Women loved Alexander Devereaux, or rather, they loved what he represented. The money, the power, the challenge of cracking his icy exterior. They threw themselves at him with depressing predictability, and he accepted their attention with the same detachment he brought to everything else. Sex was transactional. Relationships were strategic. Love was a liability he couldn't afford. He had learned that lesson young, watching his mother exhaust herself. For a man who repaid her devotion with addiction and violence, love made you vulnerable, made you stay when you should leave, made you sacrifice your own survival for someone who would destroy you without a second thought. Alexander refused to be destroyed, so he kept every connection shallow, surface level, easy to sever when the time came. The women in his life cycled through like seasons, beautiful, accomplished, interchangeable. They lasted 3 months on average, 6 at most, just long enough to satisfy social expectations, never long enough to develop roots. Victoria Ashworth was supposed to be different. She was the daughter of a senator, heiress to a pharmaceutical fortune, connected to every power structure that mattered in American politics. Their relationship was a merger more than a romance, her family's influence combined, with his financial empire creating a dynasty that could shape policy for generations. The engagement had been announced 6 weeks ago. The ring on Victoria's finger cost $2.3 million. The wedding was scheduled for spring, and Alexander felt nothing. Not love, not excitement, not even the mild affection that might justify spending a lifetime with someone. He felt only the grim satisfaction of a deal well negotiated. Victoria would give him political access, social legitimacy, and heirs to inherit the empire he was building. In exchange, she would receive unlimited funds, a prestigious name, and a husband who would never be home often enough to bore her. It was a perfect arrangement, perfectly hollow, But Hollow was safe. Hollow couldn't hurt him. The weight of real emotion terrified him. He had felt it once, just once, a lifetime ago. Before the billions. Before the ice. Before he had learned to amputate every feeling that threatened to slow him down. He had been 22 years old, fresh out of Harvard, still soft in ways he would later learn to despise. And he had fallen in love with a woman named Mallory. They met in a coffee shop in Cambridge. Alexander was drowning in job applications, trying to decide which of a dozen offers would launch him fastest toward the success he craved. Mallory was studying for her GED, scribbling notes in a worn composition book, drinking the cheapest coffee on the menu like it was liquid gold. She was everything he wasn't supposed to want. Poor, unpolished, utterly unconcerned with the status games that consumed everyone else in his orbit. She laughed too loudly, spoke too honestly, wore her heart on her sleeve like she'd never learned to hide it. He should have walked past her table without a second glance. Instead, he sat down. "You look like you're solving the mysteries of the universe," he said, nodding at her notebook. She looked up. Those eyes, brown with flecks of gold, impossibly warm, met his. "Just algebra," she said. "But some days, algebra feels like the universe." He smiled. He hadn't known it then, but that smile was the last genuine one he would wear for 16 years. They dated for 8 months. 8 months of walking through Boston, talking for hours about everything and nothing. 8 months of cheap dinners in her cramped apartment where she cooked with whatever the food bank had provided and made it taste like a feast. 8 months of feeling, for the first time in his life, like he belonged somewhere. Mallory didn't care about his ambitions. She cared about him. The real him. The frightened boy from South Boston who was still hiding beneath all the armor he had accumulated. She saw past the polished exterior and loved what she found, and that terrified him. Because love was weight. Love required staying. And Alexander had built his entire identity on the promise that he would never stop moving long enough to be left behind. The opportunity came from Richard Devereaux, not his dead father, his father's estranged older brother, the man who had inherited the family fortune while Alexander's branch withered in poverty, the man who had never acknowledged his nephew's existence until Harvard made Alexander impossible to ignore. Richard Sr. was dying, no heirs of his own, and he was offering Alexander everything. The money, the connections, the company, on one condition: complete commitment, no distractions. "I'm giving you a dynasty," Richard said during their only meeting. "But dynasties require sacrifice. I need to know you're willing to cut away anything that might slow you down." Alexander had understood exactly what he meant. He left Mallory without explanation, no conversation, no closure, no chance for her to talk him out of what he already knew he had to do. He simply vanished. Changed his phone number, moved to New York, began building the empire that would consume the next 16 years of his life. He told himself it was kindness. She was struggling enough without being dragged into his world of corporate warfare and hostile takeovers. She deserved someone who could give her the simple, present, stable love she craved, someone who would stay. He was not that person. He would never be that person. So he made the calculated decision to disappear, and he buried the guilt so deep that he almost forgot it existed. Almost. The rationalization became a mantra. I did the right thing. She's better off without me. Love is a luxury I can't afford. He repeated these phrases during the early years, when guilt still surfaced at unexpected moments. When he saw a woman with dark hair on the street, and his heart stuttered. When he dreamed of her face and woke with an ache he couldn't explain. Eventually, the rationalizations hardened into truth. He had done the right thing. Emotion was weakness. Attachment was liability. Every successful person understood that sacrifice was the price of achievement. His uncle had been right. The dynasty was everything. By the time Richard Sr. died, 3 years after making Alexander his heir, the transformation was complete. The frightened boy from South Boston no longer existed. In his place stood Alexander Calder Devereaux, billionaire, shark, machine, a man so perfectly optimized for success that he had forgotten how to be anything else. He attended his uncle's funeral without shedding a tear, delivered a eulogy that moved the audience to weeping, and felt nothing, nothing at all. The emptiness arrived quietly. It didn't announce itself with fanfare or crisis. It simply accumulated, year after year, like dust in the corners of his immaculate penthouse. The hollow feeling after closing another deal. the silence of eating alone in Michelin-starred restaurants, the performative exhaustion of attending galas where everyone wanted something from him and no one actually saw him. He was surrounded by people constantly. He had never been more alone. Success, Alexander discovered, was a treadmill. Each milestone was supposed to bring satisfaction. Each billion was supposed to fill the void. Each acquisition, each magazine cover, each breathless profile about. His genius was supposed to prove that he had made the right choices. It never did. The void remained, hungry, insatiable, waiting. He fed it more work, more deals, more movement. He ran faster and faster, convinced that the next achievement would finally be enough. But enough never came. And somewhere, in the depths he refused to examine, Alexander began to suspect that he had traded everything real for everything hollow, that he had sacrificed love on the altar of ambition, and that ambition had turned out to be a god that didn't answer prayers. Victoria didn't help. She was intelligent, accomplished, beautiful by every conventional standard. Their relationship made perfect sense on paper. Perfect merger, perfect dynasty, perfect future stretching ahead in an endless sequence of obligations. But when he looked at her, he felt nothing. When she touched him, he felt nothing. When he imagined the next 50 years by her side, he felt only a crushing exhaustion that he couldn't explain. This was supposed to be the pinnacle, the ultimate success, the culmination of everything he had sacrificed for. So why did it feel like dying in slow motion? The night of the storm, Alexander was fleeing. Not physically. He was in the back of his Range Rover, heading to a meeting that would finalize the biggest merger of his career. But psychologically, he was running harder than ever. Victoria had pressed him about wedding details that morning. His assistant had reminded him about the prenatal appointment Victoria wanted him to attend. She was 3 months pregnant, though they hadn't announced it publicly yet. His father's anniversary of death was tomorrow, and beneath all of it, the emptiness was screaming. Alexander drowned it in quarterly reports, reading the same figures over and over without absorbing them. Anything to avoid thinking, anything to maintain momentum. Running forward doesn't mean running free. He didn't know that yet, but he was about to learn. Harold's voice cut through his concentration. "Sir, I think there's someone on the shoulder up ahead." Alexander didn't look up. "Go around them." "Sir, it looks like—" "I said go around them, Harold." The Range Rover accelerated. Headlights swept across the shoulder, briefly illuminating a broken-down Honda Civic, and Alexander looked up. He saw her, drenched, bleeding, pregnant, screaming into the storm with her mouth open so wide it looked like her face might split in half. "Keep driving," the cold, practical part of his brain instructed. "You have a meeting. You have a merger. You cannot afford complications." But something broke through the ice. Something ancient and dormant, and absolutely terrified, because even through the rain and the years and the deliberate forgetting, some part of him recognized her. "Stop the car." Harold hesitated. "Sir, stop the car." The Range Rover screeched to a halt, and Alexander Calder Devereaux, the man who never stopped, stepped out into the storm. The rain hit Alexander like a punishment, cold, relentless, unforgiving. Within seconds, his $4,000 cashmere coat was soaked through, clinging to his shoulders like a weight he hadn't asked to carry. His Italian leather shoes, handcrafted, irreplaceable, sank into puddles that splashed dirty water up to his ankles. He didn't notice any of it. His entire focus was locked on the figure crumpled against the broken-down Honda Civic, a pregnant woman, alone, bleeding, screaming into the storm while the world roared past without acknowledgement. Alexander had spent 16 years training himself not to feel. But something was cracking. Something was breaking through the ice. He moved toward her with purpose he didn't understand, his body operating on instinct that bypassed the cold calculations of his mind. Behind him, he heard Harold calling out, something about the ambulance, something about waiting in the car. But the words dissolved into the white noise of rain and thunder. Nothing mattered except reaching her. Nothing else existed. 10 feet away, he could see the blood. It pooled beneath her bare feet, mixing with rainwater and motor oil, creating dark rivers that snaked across the asphalt. Her hospital gown was plastered to her swollen belly, translucent with water, offering no protection against the brutal cold. She was shaking violently. Her lips had turned blue, and she was still screaming, not words, not pleas, just raw sound torn from somewhere primal and desperate. Alexander had closed deals worth billions without his pulse rising above 70. but watching this woman suffer made his heart pound like it was trying to escape his chest. "Ma'am," the word came out strangled, wrong, too formal for this moment, too distant. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her head snapped toward him. Wild eyes, unfocused, rolling with pain and fear and something that looked like surrender. She didn't seem to register that he was real. "Help is coming," Alexander said, moving closer. "I'm going to help you. I'm not going to leave." The words felt foreign in his mouth. He hadn't promised to stay anywhere in 16 years. The Civic's hazard lights were still blinking. Click, click, click. Weak orange pulses that barely cut through the storm, illuminating the shoulder in rhythmic flashes. Each pulse cast strange shadows across the woman's face, turning her features into a flickering mask of light and darkness. Alexander was 5 feet away now, close enough to see the details, close enough for the flickering light to reveal what the rain had hidden. Click, dark hair plastered to pale skin. Click, high cheekbones streaked with tears and rain. Click, a mouth that curved in a way he had spent 16 years trying to forget. Click, eyes, brown with flecks of gold, impossibly warm even now, that met his through the storm. The world stopped. Everything stopped. The rain still fell, but Alexander couldn't feel it. The thunder still rolled, but he couldn't hear it. His lungs still drew air, but he couldn't breathe. Because he knew that face. He knew it in his bones, in his blood, in the buried chambers of a heart he had convinced himself no longer functioned. It was impossible. It was 16 years ago, and 400 miles away, and a lifetime he had deliberately destroyed. It was Mallory? The name escaped before he could stop it. A whisper, a prayer, a wound ripped open after 16 years of pretending it had healed. The woman's wild eyes sharpened. For a moment, one terrible, infinite moment, confusion replaced the pain on her face. She squinted through the rain, through the years, through the wall of trauma that separated present from past. Then recognition hit her like a physical blow. Her body went rigid. Her bloody hands flew up as if to ward him off. And she spoke his name in a voice that carried every ounce of rage and grief and betrayal she had carried for 16 years. Alexander. Alexander staggered backward. His expensive shoes slipped on the wet asphalt, and he nearly fell. Would have fallen if his hand hadn't caught the Civic's hood at the last moment. The metal was cold beneath his palm. Real. Solid. An anchor in a reality that had suddenly become unrecognizable. Mallory. Mallory was here. Mallory was pregnant and bleeding and dying on the side of I-95, and he had almost driven past her without stopping. The realization hit him like a blow to the chest. All those cars that had passed her tonight. All those headlights that had swept across her suffering and kept going. He had almost been one of them. Had ordered Harold to go around her, to leave her to die in the rain because stopping would have been an inconvenience. He had almost killed her twice. Once by leaving, once by refusing to stop. His vision blurred. For a horrifying moment, Alexander thought he was going to pass out. The edges of his sight went gray and fuzzy, his legs turned to water, and the pounding in his chest became so violent that he wondered if he was having a heart attack. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. He had spent 16 years running from this woman, from what she represented, from what he had done to her, from the person he had been when he loved her. He had buried her so deep that he had almost convinced himself she was a dream. But she was real. She was here. And she was looking at him with an expression that stripped away every layer of armor he had spent his adult life constructing. You. Mallory's voice cracked on the word. Of all the people in the world, of all the cars on this highway, it had to be you. Alexander opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. What could he possibly say? "I'm sorry I abandoned you without explanation. I'm sorry I chose money over love. I'm sorry I've spent 16 years pretending you didn't exist." No words were adequate. No apology could bridge this chasm. So he stood there, rain streaming down his face, and let her see what he had never shown anyone. Fear. Shame. The absolute devastation of a man confronting the worst thing he had ever done. Harold's voice cut through the storm. Sir, are you all right? You've gone completely white." Alexander ignored him. He couldn't look away from Mallory, couldn't process anything beyond the impossible reality of her presence. His mind was cycling through memories he had buried for 16 years, each one more painful than the last. Her laugh in that Cambridge coffee shop. Her hands in his, warm and trusting. Her face when she slept, peaceful in a way she never was while awake. And the last time he had seen her, though she hadn't seen him, he had watched from across the street as she returned to her apartment, grocery bags in hand, humming something tuneless and happy. She hadn't known that was goodbye. Hadn't known he was already planning his escape. He had driven away and never looked back. Until now. "Say something," Mallory demanded. Her voice was raw, shredded by screaming and pain and years of unanswered questions. "You owe me that much. You disappear for 16 years without a word, and now you show up while I'm bleeding to death on the side of a highway? Say something." Alexander's throat closed around the words. I didn't know it was you. I just saw someone who needed help and you almost drove past." The accusation hung between them. "I saw your car slow down, then speed up again. You almost left me here to die." Alexander felt the truth of it like a knife between his ribs. "Yes," he admitted. "I almost did." Mallory laughed, that broken, hysterical sound that had nothing to do with humor. "Of course you did. That's what you do, isn't it? Leave, run, pretend the people you hurt don't exist." "Mallory, don't." She held up a bloody hand. "Don't say my name like you have any right to it. You lost that right when you vanished without—" The contraction hit. Mallory's tirade dissolved into a scream. Her body jackknifed forward, hands flying to her belly as the contraction ripped through her with savage intensity. She would have collapsed completely if Alexander hadn't lunged forward to catch her. His arms wrapped around her before conscious thought could intervene. Instinct. Pure instinct. The same instinct that had made him stop the car. The same instinct that was now overriding 16 years of carefully cultivated detachment. She was in his arms, bleeding against his ruined coat, screaming into his chest, and every wall he had ever built came crashing down. "Breathe," he heard himself saying. "You have to breathe. Come on, Mallory. Breathe through it." She clutched his lapels with blood-stained fingers, her grip so tight he could feel her nails through the fabric. Her body was a knot of tension and pain, every muscle fighting the impossible pressure of a baby demanding to be born. "I can't," she gasped. I can't. "You can." Alexander's voice was steady now, steadier than it had any right to be. "You're the strongest person I've ever known. You survived losing your mother. You survived foster care. You survived—" He stopped himself. "You survived me." But the unspoken words hung between them anyway. The contraction released. Mallory sagged against him, her forehead pressed to his shoulder, her breath coming in ragged sobs. She was trembling so violently that Alexander could feel it in his own bones. "I hate you," she whispered. "I want you to know that. I hate you so much. I know. You destroyed me. When you left, you destroyed everything. I know. And now you're here. Now, of all times. Now when I'm—" Another sob choked off her words. Alexander held her tighter. He didn't deserve to hold her. Didn't deserve to be the one she leaned on. Didn't deserve anything except the contempt she was giving him. But he wasn't going to let go. Not this time. Not ever again. "Harold," he shouted over his shoulder. "Where's that ambulance?" 10 minutes, sir. The dispatcher says the roads are—" "She doesn't have 10 minutes. Alexander looked down at the blood pooling beneath Mallory's feet, at her gray, waxy skin, at the way her eyes kept drifting, losing focus. "She doesn't have 10 minutes. He made a decision, the same way he made every decision, instantly, irrevocably, without room for doubt. Get the emergency supplies from the trunk, blankets, first aid kit, everything. "Sir, I'm not qualified to—" "Neither am I. But we're doing this anyway." He lowered Mallory gently to the ground, supporting her back against the Civic's wheel well. She was still clutching his coat, still trembling, still looking at him with that mixture of hatred and desperate need. "Why did you stop?" she asked. "Really? Why?" Alexander's smoothed wet hair back from her face. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've spent 16 years never stopping for anything, and then I saw you, and I couldn't keep driving. I just couldn't." Mallory stared at him. For a long moment, something shifted in her eyes. Not forgiveness. They were 1,000 miles from forgiveness. But something adjacent, something like recognition of the truth. "The baby's coming," she said quietly. "My daughter, she's coming now." Alexander nodded. Then let's bring her into the world. Now, I need to ask you something before we continue. Do you believe people deserve a second chance? Not the easy kind, not second chances for small mistakes and minor failures. I'm talking about the hard kind. Second chances for people who cause real damage, who broke hearts and shattered trust and walked away when they should have stayed. Do they deserve the opportunity to make it right? Drop your answer in the comments below. Let me know what you think, because this story, Mallory and Alexander's story, is going to test everything you believe about forgiveness, redemption, and whether the past can ever truly be overcome. And while you're at it, make sure you're subscribed and that notification bell is turned on, because the next part of this story, the birth, the hospital, the revelation that connects these two in ways neither of them ever imagined. You don't want to miss a single second. The Range Rover tore through the storm at 90 miles per hour. Harold's knuckles were white against the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road, with the intensity of a man who understood that lives depended on his precision. The windshield wipers slashed back and forth at maximum speed, barely keeping pace with the deluge. In the back seat, silence reigned. Alexander had lifted Mallory into the vehicle himself, ignoring her protests, ignoring the blood that soaked through his clothes, ignoring everything except the need to get her somewhere safe. He had positioned her across the leather seats with her head in his lap, emergency blankets wrapped around her trembling body. Now he sat frozen, one hand supporting her shoulders, the other pressed against her swollen belly where he could feel the baby moving. His daughter. He didn't know that yet, but some part of him suspected. Mallory's eyes were closed, not from unconsciousness. Her grip on his wrist was too strong for that, her breathing too deliberately measured. She was retreating, building walls, fortifying herself against the emotional assault of his presence while simultaneously depending on him for survival. The contradiction was almost too much to bear. Alexander watched her face in the dim glow of passing streetlights, watched pain flicker across her features with each contraction, watched her lips move in silent words he couldn't decipher. 16 years of absence, and he didn't know what to say. What words could bridge that gap? What language existed for this moment? So he said nothing, and the silence grew heavier with every mile. The only sounds were mechanical. Engine roaring, wipers slashing, tires hissing through standing water. Occasional crackle from Harold's phone as the GPS recalculated their route around accident scenes and road closures. And beneath it all, the soft, rhythmic sound of Mallory's controlled breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the breathing of a woman who had learned to survive pain alone. Alexander recognized it because he did the same thing. Different pain, same coping mechanism, the deliberate regulation of something you could control when everything else was falling apart. They had both become experts at enduring. But enduring wasn't the same as living, and watching Mallory now, broken, bleeding, fighting to bring a life into the world, Alexander was struck by the terrible thought that maybe they had both been dying slowly for 16 years, just in different ways. The contractions came like clockwork now. Every 3 minutes, Mallory's body would seize. Her face would contort. Her grip on Alexander's wrist would tighten until he felt the bones grinding together. And she would breathe, that measured, deliberate rhythm, until the wave passed. She never screamed. Not anymore. She had screamed on the highway, when she was alone and hopeless and convinced that death was coming. But here, in the back of his car, with his hands on her body and his eyes on her face, she refused to show weakness. Pride, Alexander realized. Even now, even in agony, even bleeding and broken and utterly dependent on the man who had abandoned her. Mallory was too proud to let him see her fall apart. It broke something in his chest. "You need to relax," he said quietly, breaking the silence for the first time. "Fighting the contractions makes them worse. You need to. Don't tell me what I need." Her voice was a blade. "You lost the right to tell me anything 16 years ago." Alexander absorbed the cut without flinching. "You're right," he said. "I did. But I'm here now, and if you fight your body instead of working with it, you're going to exhaust yourself before we reach the hospital." Mallory's eyes snapped open. For a long moment, she just stared at him, searching for something. Judgment, maybe, or mockery, or the cold indifference she remembered from the man who had vanished without goodbye. She didn't find it. What she found instead was fear, raw, unguarded fear in the eyes of a billionaire who had built an empire on never showing vulnerability. "You're scared," she said, accusation and wonder mixed in equal parts. "Terrified," Alexander admitted. "Of what?" "Of losing you." Again, the words hung in the air between them. Neither knew how to respond to them. Another contraction came, and Mallory's eyes squeezed shut. But this time, instead of fighting, she let out a long, shuddering breath. Let her body do what it needed to do. Let her grip on Alexander's wrist soften from crushing to merely desperate. Progress. Tiny, fragile progress. When the contraction passed, she spoke again. "You didn't lose me, Alexander. You threw me away." He had no defense. She was right. The conversation came in pieces. Fragments between contractions. Words exchanged during the brief windows of respite before the next wave hit. Neither of them had the energy for complete thoughts, so they traded half-sentences, like people exchanging currency in a language they had forgotten how to speak. "Why did you leave?" A question she had asked herself 10,000 times over 16 years. A question that had poisoned every relationship she had attempted since. Alexander's jaw tightened. "I was offered everything I thought I wanted, and I was too weak to choose you instead." Weak. It was the last word Mallory expected from his mouth. Alexander Devereaux didn't admit weakness, didn't acknowledge vulnerability, didn't confess to anything that might diminish his image of perfect control. But he had said it, and she didn't know what to do with that. Another contraction, another 3 minutes of breathing through fire. When it passed, she asked, "Did you ever think about me after?" A pause, long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Every day." Liar. "Every single day, Mallory. I tried to stop. Tried to bury you. Tried to convince myself that what we had was just a detour on my way to something bigger." His voice cracked. "But you were never a detour. You were the destination. I was just too blind to see it." She wanted to dismiss the words as manipulation, but his hand was trembling against her belly. And billionaires didn't tremble. "I named her Lily," Mallory said suddenly. The non sequitur confused him. "What?" "The baby. I named her Lily, after my grandmother." Alexander processed this. "That's beautiful. She was the only one who ever really loved me, until—" She stopped. "Until you." The words she couldn't say, because saying them would mean admitting that what they had was real, that his leaving had broken something fundamental inside her, that she had spent 16 years trying to recover from a man who was, sitting beside her right now, holding her like she still mattered. "I looked for you," Alexander said quietly, "after I left, not right away. I was too much of a coward for that. But later, when the emptiness got loud enough that I couldn't ignore it anymore." Mallory's breath caught. "When?" 5 years ago, maybe 6. I hired investigators. They found your last known address, but you had already moved. Trail went cold. Why were you looking?" Another pause. "Because I made a mistake, the worst mistake of my life, and I wanted to apologize." "That's it? Apologize?" "I wanted to see if there was anything left, anything worth salvaging. There wasn't." Her voice was ice. "You made sure of that." The next contraction was the worst yet. Mallory arched off the seat, a sound escaping her throat that was barely human. Alexander caught her, held her, felt her body fighting a battle that was moving toward its conclusion whether they were ready or not. When it finally passed, she was crying, not from pain, or not only from pain. Something else had broken loose. Some dam that she had spent years constructing had finally given way. "I need to tell you something," she gasped. Alexander's blood went cold. "Mallory, save your strength." "No. You need to hear this, before we get to the hospital, before I lose my nerve." She looked up at him with those impossibly warm eyes, now flooded with tears and terror and something that looked like grief. "The baby," she said. "Lily, she's—" Another contraction threatened to hit. Mallory fought it back through sheer force of will. "She's not Marcus's—" Alexander's brain stuttered. Marcus. She had mentioned Marcus on the highway, the boyfriend who had thrown her out, the father who had abandoned his child. "What do you mean?" "Marcus and I, we were together for 2 years, but we weren't. The timing doesn't." She was struggling to form sentences through the pain and the tears and the weight of what she was trying to say. "I was already pregnant when I started seeing him. I didn't know it, but I was—" The world tilted. Alexander felt the leather seat beneath him, the warmth of her body against his, the movement of the baby under his palm. But none of it seemed real anymore. I don't understand. 8 months ago, Alexander, Mallory's voice was breaking. 8 months ago, I was in Boston, closing out my grandmother's estate, signing papers, and I ran into someone I never expected to see again. The memory hit him like a physical blow. Boston, 8 months ago. The estate lawyers had needed him to sign documents related to his mother's death, paperwork that had been tangled in probate for years. He had flown in for a single day, wanting to minimize his time in a city that held too many ghosts. And he had seen her, across the street from the law offices, just a glimpse. Dark hair, familiar profile. He had told himself it was imagination, coincidence, someone who merely looked like the woman he had abandoned. But it hadn't been imagination. It had been Mallory. "We didn't talk," she continued, the words tumbling out now like water through a broken dam. "I saw you coming out of that building in your expensive suit, and I couldn't face you, so I ducked into a bar, ordered something to calm my nerves, and then—" She trailed off. Alexander's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it over the storm. "And then what?" "You walked into the same bar." The memory crystallized with brutal clarity. He had stopped for a drink before heading to the airport. Just one. He never had more than one when traveling. The bar had been dim, anonymous, the kind of place where nobody recognized anybody. But there had been a woman, dark hair, sad eyes, sitting alone at the end of the bar with a drink she wasn't touching. He hadn't recognized her, hadn't allowed himself to recognize her, but some part of him had known. Some buried instinct had drawn him toward her, made him sit down beside her, made him talk to her like she was a stranger he was meeting for the first time. They had talked for hours, and then they had gone back to his hotel. And then— "Oh God," Alexander breathed. "I left before you woke up," Mallory said. "I couldn't bear to see your face when you realized who I was, couldn't bear to hear whatever excuse you would make for disappearing again. So I ran." She laughed, that broken sound he was coming to hate. "I'm good at running too, it turns out. Must have learned it from you." The world had stopped making sense. Alexander sat in the back of his Range Rover, rain hammering the roof, Mallory bleeding in his arms, and tried to process the information that had just demolished everything he thought he knew. The baby was his. Lily was his. He had a daughter who was about to be born on the side of a highway because the universe had a brutal sense of irony. His mind cycled through calculations automatically. 8 months ago, Boston, the bar, the hotel, the morning he had woken alone, vaguely disappointed, but too distracted by meetings to dwell on it. He hadn't used protection, neither had she. They had been drunk on old feelings and older wounds, and they had made a child in the wreckage of everything they had once been to each other. A child, his child. The word kept ricocheting around his skull, refusing to settle into meaning. Victoria's face flashed through his mind. His fiancée, pregnant, with his child, waiting for him at home, with wedding plans and nursery designs and a future that had been carefully negotiated between families. He was going to have 2 children, by 2 different women, in approximately the same time frame. The realization should have triggered his usual damage control instincts. Calculate the fallout, minimize the exposure, protect the empire at all costs. Instead, he felt nothing except the weight of Mallory in his arms and the movement of his daughter beneath his palm. "Say something," Mallory demanded. Her voice was hoarse. "You've been silent for 2 minutes. Say something." Alexander opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The word caught. "I'm going to be a father. You were always going to be a father. You just didn't know it. Why didn't you tell me? When you found out, why didn't you find me?" The question came out sharper than intended, almost accusatory. Mallory's expression hardened. "Find you, find the man who abandoned me without a word, the man who changed his phone number and moved to a different city, and made it absolutely clear that he wanted nothing to do with me." Her voice was rising now, powered by 16 years of suppressed rage. "I spent 2 months trying to reach you after you left, Alexander. 2 months of calling disconnected numbers and sending letters that came back unopened. 2 months of telling myself there must be some explanation, some reason, something that would make it make sense." Tears streamed down her face. "There wasn't. You just left. And now you want to know why I didn't hunt you down to tell you I was carrying your child?" She pushed against his chest, trying to create distance, but her body was too weak to manage it. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you. I didn't want your money or your guilt or your half-hearted attempts at involvement. I wanted to raise my daughter in peace, without the shadow of a father who would inevitably disappoint her. The words hit Alexander like physical blows. Each one deserved. Each one true. I'm sorry. The words were inadequate. He knew they were inadequate. I'm sorry for leaving. I'm sorry for every day of the last 16 years. I'm sorry for that night in Boston when I should have recognized you, should have stayed, should have... Sorry doesn't fix anything. I know. Sorry doesn't give me back the months I spent terrified and alone. Doesn't erase Marcus, or the shelter, or bleeding on the side of a highway while the world drove past. I know. Then why are you saying it? Alexander looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something shift inside his chest. Something fundamental, something permanent. Because it's the only place to start. The hospital appeared through the rain like a lighthouse. Bright lights. Emergency entrance. Ambulances lined up under an awning that offered shelter from the storm. Harold pulled the Range Rover to a screeching stop, and suddenly everything was motion. Doors flying open, medical personnel rushing toward them. Shouts and commands and the organized chaos of people who saved lives for a living. Alexander helped lift Mallory onto a stretcher, his blood-soaked hands finally releasing their grip on her body. Their eyes met one last time before the nurses wheeled her away. Stay, she said. One word, barely audible over the commotion, but he heard it. I'm not going anywhere, Alexander promised. And for the first time in 16 years, he meant it. The doors swung closed behind her. Alexander stood in the ambulance bay, rain still pouring down, his ruined clothes drawing stares from everyone who passed. He looked like a homeless man who had wandered into the wrong neighborhood, like a survivor of some disaster that hadn't made the news. In a way, he was. The disaster was his own life. The ruin was everything he had built in place of what actually mattered. His phone buzzed. Victoria. He stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he silenced it, put the phone back in his pocket, and walked through the hospital doors. His daughter was about to be born. Everything else could wait. The emergency room erupted into controlled pandemonium. Nurses in green scrubs swarmed around Mallory's stretcher, calling out. Vital signs and medical terminology that blurred into white noise. Monitors beeped. 4 lines were established with practiced precision. Someone was cutting away what remained of her soaked hospital gown, while another pressed warm blankets against her trembling body. Blood pressure's dropping. She's lost too much blood. We need to type and cross now. Baby's heart rate is decelerating. We need to move. Alexander followed the chaos through the double doors, his presence drawing sharp looks from staff members who clearly thought he didn't belong. A security guard stepped into his path, one hand raised. Sir, you can't be back here. Family waiting room is... I'm the father. The words came out before he could stop them. The security guard blinked, taking in Alexander's blood-soaked designer clothes, his disheveled hair, his wild eyes. Nothing about his appearance suggested Billionaire. Everything about it suggested trauma. Sir, I said I'm the father. Alexander's voice dropped to something dangerous. And if you try to keep me from that room, I will buy this hospital and have you terminated before the night is over. Now move. The guard moved. The labor and delivery ward was a maze of curtains and machines and urgent voices. Alexander pushed through it all, following the sound of Mallory's cries until he found her in a room at the end of the corridor. She was surrounded by medical personnel, at least 6 of them, maybe more. Someone was examining her while another adjusted the fetal monitor. A third was hanging a bag of blood on the 4-pole, the dark red liquid flowing down through the tube into her arm. BP is still dropping. We might need to take her to surgery. The baby's crowning. We don't have time for surgery. Then we do this here. Everyone ready? Alexander pushed into the room. Mallory. Her head turned toward his voice. Through the haze of pain and fear and blood loss, recognition flickered in her eyes. You're still here. I told you I wasn't leaving. A nurse tried to intercept him. Sir, you need to scrub in if you're going to. Then give me what I need to scrub in. 30 seconds later, he was at Mallory's side, his hands wrapped in surgical gloves, his ruined coat replaced by a hospital gown that didn't quite fit his broad shoulders. He looked absurd. He didn't care. The next hour was a war. Mallory's body was failing. The hemorrhaging that had started on the highway had weakened her to dangerous levels, and now she was fighting to deliver a baby, while simultaneously fighting to stay conscious. "Push," the doctor commanded. "I need you to push, Mallory." "I can't." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't have anything left. You have to. Your daughter needs you to push." Alexander gripped her hand tighter. "Look at me," he said. "Mallory, look at me." Her glazed eyes found his. "You told me once that your mother taught you how to survive, that she showed you how to turn nothing into something. Do you remember that?" A flicker of something, memory maybe, or grief, passed across her face. "Yes, then survive this. Turn this pain into something. Bring our daughter into the world. Our daughter," the words hung between them, weighted with everything they had lost and everything they might still become. Mallory's jaw tightened, and she pushed. A nurse approached Alexander during a brief lull between contractions. "Sir, we may need to perform an emergency cesarean. There are complications we didn't anticipate. It would be better if you waited outside while we—" "No. Sir, I understand you want to be supportive, but—" I said no. Alexander's voice was steel. "I'm not leaving this room. I'm not leaving her. Whatever happens, I'm going to be here for it." The nurse hesitated, clearly weighing protocol against the immovable force of his determination. "Fine," she said finally, "but stay out of the way of the medical team." Alexander nodded and returned to Mallory's side. She was fading. He could see it, the way her eyes kept drifting closed, the way her grip on his hand was weakening, the way her breaths were becoming shallow and irregular. "Stay with me," he murmured. "Mallory, stay with me." "Tired," she whispered. "So tired." "I know, but you can rest soon. Just a little longer. Just hold on a little longer." Her eyes found his again. "Why do you care?" The question came out slurred, confused. "You left. You didn't want me." The words pierced something deep. "I was wrong," Alexander said. "I was wrong about everything, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it, but I need you to stay alive so I can try. Please, Mallory. Please stay alive." The monitor screamed. One moment, the room was filled with the steady beep of Mallory's heartbeat and the rapid flutter of the baby's. The next, alarms were blaring, red lights flashing, and the medical team was moving with an urgency that turned Alexander's blood to ice. "She's crashing. Baby's in distress. Heart rate down to 60. We need to get this baby out now." Alexander was pushed aside as more personnel flooded into the room. He watched helplessly as they surrounded Mallory, their hands moving in practiced choreography that he couldn't follow. Someone was pressing on her belly. Someone else was adjusting the fetal monitor. A third was drawing something into a syringe. "Mallory." He tried to push back toward her. "Mallory, can you hear me?" "Sir, you need to step back." "What's happening? What's wrong with her?" "She's hemorrhaging again. The baby is in fetal distress. We're doing everything we can, but you need to let us work." Alexander stumbled backward until his shoulders hit the wall. This couldn't be happening. After everything, after finding her on the highway, after the drive-thru, the storm, after learning about Lily, he couldn't lose them both. Not now. Not when he had just discovered what he had been missing for 16 years. He had closed deals worth billions without breaking a sweat. But watching Mallory die would break him completely. Prayers. Alexander hadn't prayed since he was a child, kneeling beside his mother in that cramped apartment above the laundromat. But the words came back now, unbidden, desperate. "Please, please, don't take them. I'll do anything, give anything. Just let them live." He didn't know who he was praying to, didn't know if anyone was listening, but he prayed anyway, because it was all he had left. "I've got the head." The doctor's voice cut through the chaos. "One more push, Mallory. I know you're exhausted, but I need one more push." Mallory's eyes were barely open. Her skin had gone gray. Her lips were almost white. She looked like a ghost already halfway gone. But somehow, through sheer force of will or maternal instinct or some power that transcended medical explanation, she found one more push. Her body arched off the bed. A sound escaped her throat. Not a scream, but something deeper, something primal. And then, a new voice joined the chaos. Time stretched. Alexander would remember this moment for the rest of his life. Every detail, frozen in perfect clarity, like a photograph burned into his memory. The baby emerged in a rush of fluid and blood. Tiny, perfect, Silent. Too silent. The doctor lifted her up, this impossibly small creature with dark hair and scrunched features and limbs that flailed weakly against the cold air. She was covered in vernix and traces of blood, her skin a bluish purple that sent fresh terror through Alexander's chest. "She's not crying," someone said. "Why isn't she crying?" The words echoed what Mallory had screamed on the highway. "Why isn't my baby crying?" Time continued to stretch. The doctor placed Lily on a warming table. Hands moved across her tiny body, clearing airways, stimulating responses, doing things Alexander couldn't understand but watched with desperate intensity. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Silence. 4 seconds. 5 seconds. "Please," Alexander begged silently. "Please, please, please." 6 seconds. And then, a sound, thin at first, reedy and uncertain, like a question being asked of a world she hadn't yet decided to trust. Then stronger, then louder, then a full-throated, furious, magnificent wail that filled the room and shattered the terrible silence that had preceded it. Lily was crying. Lily was alive. The effect on the room was instantaneous. Shoulders relaxed, breaths released. Someone laughed, a sound of pure relief that bordered on hysterical. Even the monitors seemed to calm, their frantic beeping settling into steadier rhythms. 5 pounds, 4 ounces, a nurse announced, wrapping Lily in a pink blanket. Small but strong. Good lungs on this one. Alexander couldn't move. He stood frozen against the wall, tears streaming down his face, watching his daughter scream her arrival into the world. He had built empires, destroyed competitors, commanded armies of employees, and moved markets with single decisions. None of it had prepared him for this. None of it had ever mattered this much. "Mallory." The doctor's voice cut through his paralysis. "Mallory, your daughter is here. She's perfect. Can you hear me?" Alexander's attention snapped to the bed. Mallory was barely conscious. The birth had taken everything she had, but her eyes were open, barely, just slits, and they were searching. "Lily," she whispered. "Where's Lily?" The nurse brought the baby to her, placed that tiny, squalling bundle on Mallory's chest, and the room fell silent again. But this silence was different. This silence was sacred. Alexander approached the bed like a man approaching an altar. Every step felt weighted with significance. Every breath felt borrowed from some greater grace. He had spent his life taking what he wanted, demanding what he deserved, forcing the world to bend to his will. This moment demanded nothing. It simply was. Mallory looked up as he reached her side. She was still deathly pale, still weak, still connected to machines that were fighting to keep her alive. But her eyes were clear now, present, focused entirely on the baby at her breast. "She's beautiful," Mallory whispered. "She's so beautiful." Alexander looked at his daughter. Dark hair like her mother's, tiny fingers curled into fists, a face that was still squashed and wrinkled from the journey into the world. Nothing about her was conventionally beautiful. Newborns rarely were. But she was the most magnificent thing he had ever seen. "Can the first—" His voice cracked. "Can I touch her?" Mallory's eyes met his. For a long moment, she didn't answer. The history between them, the abandonment, the pain, the 16 years of silence, hung in the air like a barrier neither knew how to cross. Then, slowly, she nodded. Alexander reached out with trembling fingers. Gently, more gently than he had ever done anything in his life, he touched his daughter's hand. It was impossibly small, smaller than his thumb, smaller than logic said a human hand could be. Her fingers were translucent, the blood vessels visible beneath skin that seemed too delicate to exist. And then she gripped him. Tiny fingers wrapped around his index finger with surprising strength. Not a conscious action, just reflex, just instinct, just a newborn reaching for something solid in a world she didn't yet understand. But it broke Alexander completely. A sound escaped his throat, something between a laugh and a sob. 16 years of walls came crashing down in a single instant. The ice that had encased his heart since he walked away from Mallory, since he walked away from himself, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. "Hey," he whispered to his daughter. "Hey, Lily, I'm your dad." The word felt foreign on his tongue. And absolutely right. He had conquered markets, built empires, made more money than most people could imagine. None of it, Not a single moment of the past 16 years had ever meant this much. Success, Alexander realized, wasn't about accumulation. It wasn't about power or wealth or the relentless forward motion he had worshipped like a god. Success was this tiny hand gripping his finger, this woman who had survived everything he had done to her, this moment of pure, unguarded love that he had spent his entire adult life running from. "I'm sorry," he said again, but this time the words weren't directed at Mallory alone. They were directed at himself, at the man he had been, at the years he had wasted chasing things that didn't matter, while the things that mattered slipped through his fingers. "I'm so sorry." Mallory watched him cry. She didn't offer comfort, didn't reach for him, didn't pretend that his tears erased the damage he had done. But she didn't push him away either. And for now, for this single sacred moment, that was enough. The room remained quiet. Machines beeped softly. Rain continued to pound against the windows. Somewhere in the hospital, other emergencies demanded attention, other lives hung in the balance. But in this room, there was only silence. The kind of silence that follows something holy. The kind of silence that exists in the space between who you were and who you might become. Alexander kept his finger in Lily's grip. He didn't know what came next. Didn't know if Mallory would ever forgive him. Didn't know how to explain any of this to Victoria, to his board, to the carefully constructed life that was about to collapse under the weight of this night. But none of that mattered. Not yet. For now, there was only this. His daughter. Her mother. And the first fragile thread of something that might, against all odds, become redemption. The first morning after Lily's birth, Alexander arrived at the hospital with flowers. 3 dozen roses, red and white and pink, arranged by the most expensive florist in Manhattan, delivered by a driver who had been roused from sleep at 5 a.m. to make it happen. Mallory looked at the bouquet with something close to disgust. "You think flowers fix this?" Alexander stood in the doorway, holding the arrangement like a shield, feeling every inch the fool he was. "No, I didn't know what else to bring. How about 16 years of child support? How about an explanation that makes any kind of sense? How about a time machine?" She turned away from him, her attention returning to Lily, who was sleeping in the clear plastic bassinet beside her bed. Alexander set the flowers on a side table where they looked obscenely cheerful against the sterile hospital backdrop. "I'll take them away if you want. Leave them. The nurses might like them." She didn't look at him again. The pattern established itself quickly. Alexander would arrive each morning. Mallory would acknowledge his presence with minimal words. He would sit in the uncomfortable visitor's chair and watch his daughter sleep. Afraid to touch her without permission, afraid to speak without invitation. 3 days passed like this. 3 days of silence and proximity, and the terrible weight of things unsaid. On the 4th day, Mallory finally broke the quiet. "I'm not going to forgive you." Alexander looked up from the medical journal he'd been pretending to read. "I know. I mean it. Not now. Maybe not ever. You can sit here all you want, buy all the flowers in New York, hire the best lawyers to draw up custody agreements. None of it will erase what you did. I'm not trying to erase it. Then what are you trying to do?" The question hung in the air. Alexander considered his answer carefully. For once, he didn't want to say the strategic thing, the calculated thing, the thing designed to achieve a specific outcome. He wanted to tell the truth. "I'm trying to be here," he said finally. "That's all. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not expecting anything. I want to be here." For whatever that's worth, Mallory studied him for a long moment. "It's not worth much. Not yet." "I know." She turned back to Lily, and Alexander stayed anyway. Patience had never been Alexander's strength. In business, he moved fast, made decisions in seconds, fired employees who couldn't keep up, acquired companies before competitors knew they were for sale. But you couldn't acquire trust, couldn't fast-track forgiveness, couldn't throw money at a wound and expect it to heal. This lesson came slowly, painfully, through 1,000 small moments that chipped away at everything Alexander thought he knew about getting what he wanted. The first time he tried to hold Lily, Mallory said no. "She needs to bond with me first. She needs to know who her mother is before she starts getting passed around." The words stung. Passed around. Like he was a stranger. Like he hadn't been there when she was born. But he swallowed the protest. "Okay," he said. "You're right. I'll wait." The second time he tried, 2 days later, Mallory hesitated. Why do you want to hold her? Because she's my daughter. That's not enough. Anyone can donate sperm. Why do you want to hold her? Alexander thought about the question, really thought about it. Because when I touched her hand in the delivery room, something happened, something I can't explain. I felt connected to something bigger than myself. And I want to feel that again. Mallory watched him for a long moment. Then she lifted Lily from the bassinet and placed her, carefully, reluctantly, in his arms. Support her head, she instructed, and if she starts crying, give her back immediately. Lily didn't cry. She looked up at Alexander with unfocused newborn eyes, and he felt that same earthquake in his chest, that same shattering of walls, that same terrifying, magnificent sense of being exactly where he was supposed to be. "Hi, Lily," he whispered. "Remember me?" The moment lasted 30 seconds. Then Mallory took the baby back, and the walls went up again. But 30 seconds was more than he'd had before, and Alexander was learning to count progress in increments. Mallory was discharged after a week. The hospital bills, astronomical, as they always were for uninsured patients, with complicated deliveries, arrived before she even left the building. Alexander paid them without being asked, transferring funds before Mallory could protest. She found out anyway. "I didn't ask you to do that. I know, I don't want your money. It's not about what you want, it's about what Lily needs. She needs a mother who isn't drowning in medical debt. Let me do this much." Mallory's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue further. The apartment Alexander found for her was modest by his standards, luxurious by hers. 2 bedrooms, new appliances, safe neighborhood, close to the pediatric clinic where Lily would receive her checkups. Mallory refused it 3 times before finally accepting. "This isn't about us," she said, standing in the empty living room with Lily in her arms. "This is about her. I'm taking this for her. I understand. And it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean I trust you. Doesn't mean I want you in our lives. I understand that too." She looked around the space, at the fresh paint, the clean windows, the possibilities it represented, and something in her expression softened slightly, just slightly. The nursery should be the room facing east. She needs morning light. Alexander made a note. He was learning to listen. The mundane struggles came next. Sleepless nights that Mallory endured alone because she refused to let Alexander stay past 8 p.m. Diaper changes and feeding schedules, and the endless cycle of a newborn's needs. Doctor's appointments that required navigating public transportation because Mallory wouldn't accept a driver. Alexander offered help constantly. Night nurses, housekeepers, meal delivery services, anything that money could provide. Mallory rejected almost all of it. "I raised myself from nothing," she said during one of his visits. "I can raise my daughter without your staff. It's not weakness to accept help. No. But it's dependency, and I've spent too many years depending on people who left." The accusation was clear. Alexander accepted it without defense. But small things slipped through. Groceries that appeared in her refrigerator when she wasn't looking. Diapers in bulk, delivered with no return address. A note on her door about a trust fund that had been established in Lily's name. Not accessible to Mallory, not usable until Lily turned 18, but present, waiting. A promise of future security. Mallory complained about the intrusions, but she didn't return the groceries, and she didn't close the trust fund. Progress, Alexander reminded himself, measured in inches. Alexander established a routine. Every morning at 7 before his first meeting, he would stop by the apartment, with coffee for Mallory and whatever supplies she needed but hadn't asked for. He would hold Lily for exactly as long as Mallory permitted, sometimes 5 minutes, sometimes 15, and then he would leave without lingering. Every evening at 6, he would return, sit in the living room while Mallory fed the baby, watch without intruding, answer questions when asked, remain silent when not. He made no promises, offered no grand declarations, just showed up, day after day after day. Victoria left him during the second week. The conversation was brutal and brief. She had seen the news. Paparazzi had captured him entering Mallory's building, and speculation was rampant about the identity of the woman and child the billionaire was visiting. A secret family, Alexander? Really? It's not secret anymore. You're unbelievable. Our wedding is in 4 months. I'm carrying your child. And you've been hiding another one? I didn't know about Lily until... I don't care when you knew. I care that you're choosing her over us. Alexander was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said finally. I suppose I am. Victoria threw the 2.3 million ring at his head. He didn't duck. His father's fury came next. Richard Devereux, the uncle who had become his father in all but blood, who had given him the empire on, the condition of total commitment, called from his Palm Beach estate with rage trembling in his voice. You're destroying everything I built, everything I gave you. For what? Some woman you used to know, some bastard child? Don't call her that. I'll call her whatever I damn well please. Do you understand what this is doing to our stock price? To the merger negotiations? Alexander hung up. He had spent his entire adult life seeking this man's approval. It had never been worth the price. The world he had built was crumbling. Business partners distanced themselves. Board members called emergency meetings. Tabloids ran wild with speculation about the mysterious woman who had captured the billionaire's attention. Alexander watched it all burn with something approaching peace. He had spent 16 years accumulating things that didn't matter. Now he was learning what did. Redemption, Mallory was learning, looked nothing like the movies. There was no grand gesture, no single moment when the pain of the past dissolved into the promise of the future. No orchestral swell or perfectly written apology that made everything okay. There was just time, day after day of Alexander showing up, week after week of him being present without demanding anything in return, month after month of small kindnesses and quiet patience, and the gradual erosion of walls she had spent 16 years building. The first time she laughed at something he said, they both froze. It was an accident, a genuine reaction to a genuine joke, and it hung in the air between them like a violation of treaty. Sorry, Mallory said automatically. For what? I don't know. Laughing. It felt wrong. Alexander set down the coffee he'd been drinking. Why would laughter be wrong? Because I'm supposed to hate you. Because you don't deserve my laughter. Maybe not. But Lily deserves to grow up in a house where her parents can be in the same room without tension. Maybe the laughter isn't for me. Maybe it's for her. Mallory considered this. Maybe, she admitted. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something adjacent. The first time she let him stay past 8 p.m., Lily was 3 months old. Colic had turned their daughter into a screaming, inconsolable creature, and Mallory was at the end of her rope. She had been walking the floor for 4 hours, bouncing and shushing and singing, and nothing was working. Alexander arrived at his usual time, saw the situation, and simply took the baby from Mallory's exhausted arms. Go sleep, he said. I'll handle this. You don't know how to. I'll figure it out. Go sleep. She was too tired to argue. When she woke up 3 hours later, the apartment was quiet. She found Alexander in the nursery, Lily asleep on his chest, both of them snoring softly in the rocking chair. She watched them for a long moment. Something in her chest, something tight and guarded and afraid, loosened slightly. Not forgiveness, but the first crack in the wall. Love didn't rebuild itself in a single moment. It rebuilt itself in 1,000 small ones. In grocery runs and diaper changes. In 3 a.m. feedings that Alexander started showing up for uninvited. In the way he learned Lily's cues before Mallory had to explain them. In the quiet evenings when they sat together without speaking, united in the exhaustion and wonder of new parenthood. Redemption, Mallory learned, was repetitive. It was the same actions performed over and over until they became patterns. Until patterns became habits. Until habits became something that looked like trust. Alexander couldn't undo 16 years of absence. But he could be present now, every day, without fail, without expectation, without the promise of anything in return. And slowly, so slowly that neither of them could point to when it began, Mallory started to believe him. Not forgive, not yet, but believe. And believing was the first step. The boardroom fell silent when Alexander walked in. 12 faces stared at him from around the polished mahogany table. His executive team, his lawyers, his CFO, all assembled for what they assumed would be damage control. The tabloid stories had been running for weeks. Stock prices had dipped. Investors were nervous. Alexander didn't care. Effective immediately, I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations. The silence deepened, became something approaching shock. His CFO, a woman named Patricia who had been with him for a decade, found her voice first. Alexander, this is unexpected. Perhaps we should discuss. There's nothing to discuss. I'll retain my position as chairman. I'll attend quarterly board meetings. But the 18-hour days, the constant travel, the obsessive involvement in every decision, that's over. May I ask why? Alexander looked around the table at the faces that had defined his world for so long. Colleagues, allies, people who respected his vision and feared his temper and had no idea who he actually was beneath the armor. Because I have a daughter, he said simply, and I refuse to miss her life the way I've missed my own. The restructuring took 3 months. Alexander promoted from within, elevating executives who had earned expanded responsibility but had been held back by his inability to delegate. He divested from ventures that required constant attention. He sold the penthouse that had never been a home and purchased a brownstone in Brooklyn, close to Mallory's apartment, close to the pediatrician, close to the life he was trying to build. The financial press called it a breakdown. His competitors called it weakness. His father called it betrayal. Alexander called it clarity. The money didn't disappear. He was too smart for that, too experienced in the architecture of wealth to dismantle what he had built entirely. But the relationship changed. Money became a tool rather than a goal, a means to provide rather than proof of worth. He established trust funds not just for Lily, but for Mallory. She rejected the one in her name 3 times before he stopped trying. I don't want your money, she said again. It's not about want, it's about security. You spent years without a safety net. Let me provide one, and what do you get in return? Nothing. That's the point. She didn't believe him, but she stopped arguing. The guilt came in waves. Every time Mallory used the premium diapers Alexander had delivered, she felt it. Every time she turned on the heat without checking her bank account first, she felt it. Every time Lily wore clothes that still had tags on them, she felt it. She had spent her entire life earning everything she had. Accepting gifts felt like surrender. The therapist helped. Alexander had suggested it, gently without pressure, after noticing that Mallory flinched every time he bought something for the apartment. She had rejected the idea initially, seeing it as another form of dependence. But the sleepless nights were taking their toll. The isolation was becoming unbearable, and the voice in her head that insisted she didn't deserve help was growing louder. She made the appointment herself, paid for it with Alexander's money, and slowly, session by session, began to untangle the knots that had been forming since childhood. Independence isn't about refusing help, the therapist said during one session. It's about having choices. You can accept support and still be independent. You can let someone provide for you and still maintain your autonomy. That's not what I learned. What did you learn? Mallory thought about her mother, working double shifts until her hands bled. About the foster homes where needing anything was treated as weakness. About Marcus, who had used financial dependence as a leash. I learned that if you rely on someone, they can destroy you. And has Alexander tried to destroy you? The question sat between them. No, Mallory admitted finally. He's just been there. Every day. Every day. And what does that tell you? Mallory didn't answer, but something shifted in her chest. The first time she asked for help, her voice cracked. Lily was 6 months old. Mallory had been fighting a cold for a week, her body exhausted from the demands of single motherhood. The apartment was a disaster. The laundry was piled to the ceiling, and she simply couldn't do it alone anymore. She called Alexander at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. Can you come over? I'll be there in 20 minutes. He didn't ask why, didn't make her explain, just came. And when he arrived, Mallory did something she hadn't done in 16 years. She let him see her at her worst. Lily's first smile happened on a Sunday morning. Alexander was lying on the living room floor, making ridiculous faces at his daughter when her tiny mouth curved upward in unmistakable delight. Mallory, Mallory, come here. She rushed in from the kitchen, dish towel still in hand. What? What's wrong? Look at her. Look at her face. Lily smiled again, a gummy, toothless, magnificent smile that transformed her features into pure joy. Mallory dropped to her knees beside Alexander. Oh my God, she's smiling. She's actually smiling. She has your smile, Alexander said quietly. Mallory glanced at him. For a moment, just a moment, the walls came down entirely. She has your eyes, she replied. They sat together on the floor, their daughter between them, watching her discover the power of her own expression. It was the first moment that felt like family. The milestones accumulated. First laugh, triggered by Alexander blowing raspberries on her belly. First, solid food, sweet potatoes, which she mostly wore rather than ate. First time rolling over, witnessed by both parents simultaneously, their phones out to capture the moment. Each milestone was shared. Each victory was mutual. And slowly, the co-parenting arrangement evolved into something more organic, less scheduled, less formal. Alexander started keeping clothes at Mallory's apartment. Mallory started texting him about small things, a funny face Lily made, a new word the pediatrician used, a question about infant development. They weren't a couple, but they were partners, in the only way that mattered. The respect came gradually. Alexander learned to admire Mallory's resilience, not as an abstract quality, but as something he witnessed daily. The way she powered through exhaustion, the way she advocated for Lily at doctor's appointments, the way she had built a life from absolute nothing and refused to apologize for it. "You're remarkable," he told her one evening. She looked up from the bottle she was preparing. "What? You survived things that would have broken most people. And you didn't just survive, you created something beautiful, a life, a home, a daughter who is going to grow up knowing exactly how strong her mother is." Mallory was quiet for a moment. That almost sounded like a compliment. It was one. She returned to the bottle, but her hands were steadier. Mallory, in turn, learned to see Alexander differently, not as the man who had abandoned her, though he was still that, but also as the man who showed up every single day, the man who changed diapers without complaint, the man who walked the floor at 3 a.m. so she could sleep, the man who had walked away from billions because his daughter mattered more. He had been a monster, but monsters could change. She had seen it with her own eyes. "I don't forgive you," she said one night, after Lily was asleep. Alexander nodded. "I know, but I'm starting to respect you again. What you're doing, giving up your old life, being here every day, it matters. I see it. It's not enough. No, it's not. But it's a start." She reached across the couch and touched his hand, just for a moment, just enough to acknowledge that something had shifted. "Don't waste it," she said. "This chance. Don't waste it." Alexander turned his hand over, letting her fingers rest in his palm. "I won't." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't love. But it was the foundation on which both might eventually be built. 3 years later, Alexander still dreamed about the highway, the rain, the blood, the way Mallory's face had looked when she realized who had stopped to save her, the terror and the rage and the impossible collision of past and present on a stretch of asphalt that should have meant nothing. He woke from those dreams sweating, but he no longer woke alone. It was a Sunday morning in October when Mallory found him on the back porch of their Brooklyn brownstone, coffee growing cold in his hands, staring at nothing. "The dream? Again?" He nodded. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. 3 years had softened the distance between them, not erased it. Some distances couldn't be erased, but transformed it into something navigable. "I think about it too," she admitted. "That night. What would have happened if you hadn't stopped? I almost didn't." "I know. I told Harold to go around you. I was looking at quarterly reports while you were bleeding to death 50 feet away. But you stopped at the last second, by accident, almost." Mallory was quiet for a moment. "Does it matter?" "What? Whether it was accident or intention, you stopped. That's what matters." Alexander turned to look at her. After 3 years, she still took his breath away. Not because of beauty, though she was beautiful, but because of everything she represented. Survival, forgiveness, the possibility of becoming something better than what you had been. "I spent 38 years never stopping," he said quietly. "For anything, for anyone. I thought momentum was the same as success. I thought if I just kept moving fast enough, the emptiness wouldn't catch me. Did it work? You know it didn't." From inside the house, a small voice called out, "Daddy, Mommy, Lily wants pancakes." Mallory smiled, that real smile that Alexander had learned to treasure because it was so rare, so hard-won. "Our daughter refers to herself in third person now. She's 3. She's allowed." "Coming, baby," Mallory called back. Then to Alexander, "We should go inside." He caught her hand before she could stand. "I love you." The words still felt sacred, He didn't say them often. Mallory had taught him that words meant nothing without actions to back them up, but when he did, he meant them with everything he had. "I know," she said. "I love you too." She hadn't said that for the first 2 years. Hearing it now still felt like a miracle. The wedding was small, 20 people in the backyard, no press, no publicity, just family, the real kind built from choice rather than blood, gathered to witness something that none of them had thought possible. Alexander's mother came. She cried through the entire ceremony. Mallory's sister did not come. Some bridges, once burned, stayed burned. But that was okay. They had built a new family from the wreckage of their old ones. Lily was the flower girl. She walked down the aisle in a white dress that she had picked out herself, scattering petals with the serious concentration of someone performing brain surgery. When she reached the front, she looked up at her parents and said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Now you have to kiss." The guests laughed. Alexander and Mallory obliged. During the reception, someone asked Alexander for the secret to his success. It was an old colleague, someone from his previous life, someone who still measured worth in stock prices and acquisition multiples. The question was asked with genuine curiosity, as if Alexander possessed knowledge that could be transferred like a file. Alexander thought about it for a long moment. "Stop," he said finally. "What?" "That's the secret. Stop. Stop running. Stop chasing. Stop treating life like a deal that needs to be closed. Just stop." The colleague looked confused. Alexander didn't try to explain. Some lessons couldn't be taught. They could only be learned. Responsibility, he had discovered, was heavier than pride. Pride was easy. Pride let you walk away from hard things, justify bad decisions, convince yourself that your comfort mattered more than your commitments. Responsibility was different. Responsibility meant showing up when you didn't want to. Staying when leaving would be easier. Choosing someone else's needs over your own desires, again and again, until the choosing became automatic. Alexander had spent the first half of his life serving pride. He intended to spend the second half serving responsibility. The money was still there, billions of it technically, investments and properties and holdings that continued to appreciate regardless of whether Alexander paid attention to them. The empire hadn't crumbled when he stepped back. It had simply continued, without him, managed by people who cared about such things. But the money had become invisible. It paid for the brownstone and Lily's preschool and the occasional vacation to places where no one recognized the Devereaux name. It provided security, eliminated worry, opened doors that would otherwise be closed, and it meant absolutely nothing. Wealth, Alexander had learned, was the ultimate distraction. It convinced you that acquisition was the same as fulfillment, that more was better, that the next deal, the next property, the next zero on your net worth would finally fill the void that no amount of money could ever touch. It was a lie, the most expensive lie ever told. What actually mattered was simpler. Lily's hand in his as they walked through the park. Mallory's laughter when he burned dinner for the third time in a week. Sunday mornings on the back porch, coffee growing cold, silence comfortable between them. Presence, attention, time. These were the only currencies that mattered, and they couldn't be bought, only given. If you've stayed with this story until now, you're not here by accident. Something in Mallory's struggle resonated with you. Something in Alexander's transformation gave you hope. Something in their journey, the pain, the patience, the slow rebuilding of trust, spoke to a part of you that understands how hard it is to change. Because change is hard, forgiveness is harder, and becoming the person you were always meant to be, that might be the hardest thing of all. But here's what I want you to take away from this story. It's never too late. Not to stop, not to turn around, not to admit you were wrong and start the long, humbling work of making it right. Alexander Devereaux spent 16 years running from the best thing that ever happened to him. He built an empire on the corpse of his own heart. He convinced himself that success and loneliness were the same thing. He was wrong. And when he finally stopped on a rain-soaked highway in the middle of nowhere for a woman he had betrayed, his real life began. The night on the highway wasn't about rescue. It was about recognition. Recognition that we are all connected, that our choices ripple outward in ways we cannot predict, that the stranger bleeding on the side of the road might be the person we wronged. decades ago, returned to offer us a chance at redemption we don't deserve. Alexander stopped that night, and everything changed. So I'm asking you, what do you need to stop running from? Who do you need to show up for? What would happen if you chose responsibility over pride, presence over accumulation, love over fear? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one. And I promise you, your story matters. Your struggle matters. Your chance at redemption matters. Just like Mallory's. Just like Alexander's. Just like the daughter they created in the chaos of that impossible night. If this story moved you, hit that like button. If you want more stories about broken people finding their way back to wholeness, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because next week, we're telling the story of a woman who discovered that her husband, of 15 years, had been living a double life, and the impossible choice she made when she found out. You won't want to miss it. Lily is 5 now. She doesn't know the story of how she was born, not yet. Someday, when she's old enough, her parents will tell her about the highway and the rain and the miracle that brought them back together. But for now, she knows only this: her daddy stops for everything. Every question, every drawing, every made-up story about unicorns and dragons and adventures in faraway lands. He stops because he learned, on the worst night of his life, that stopping was the only thing that ever really mattered, and he will never, ever forget that lesson.